Well, hello, everyone. This is once again behind the scenes of AV Rant moments before starting a podcast, just to check if my horrible setup, which is all being displayed on one laptop screen right now because I haven't set up my dual displays yet, is going to function. So we're going to test some things. Right now, I'm going to check if the link that I sent out to everyone for this will work. So everyone watching this YouTube video after the fact, this is not part of the main podcast just yet. I'm here with producer Austin. Hello, Austin.
Hi.
I think video switching is working. And let's see, live recording session. That's a good thing. Nope, that was from before. All right. Waiting to make sure this works. And I'll have to type in the address again. Riveting video, isn't it? Don't worry. There will be a video coming after this, which is not just me looking off screen at my phone. Nope, don't do that. Just, annoying. Okay. Maybe, Austin, while you're waiting, you could go to our Facebook page and click on the link I posted there and see if anything is happening.
Okay.
That's how we're going to test this out, because we're fancy. Oh, live now. That looks promising. Oh, there's me looking down at my phone like I am. Okay. I think this is functioning. Yep, that was moments ago. Okay. I'm going to declare it functional and never speak of it again. All right. So, yes, as this is behind the scenes, you're seeing how the sausage gets made, but I'm going to throw up our logo. We'll pause for a few moments and then begin the podcast. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I am Rob H, filling in for Tom Andrea, our usual full-time host today. And this week I am here with
Austin Pond.
Yes,
and I will not be filling in for Rob because I expect he'll be doing most of the answering of the questions.
I will attempt to do so. Yes, that is true. And yeah, we have a very odd recording schedule this week. There are power outages in Tom's part of the country. He is very doubtful he'll have power back in order to record tonight. We postponed our recording already from last night. So for the folks who normally watch us live as we record the podcast, our apologies for making that not possible this week, but we figured some podcast better than no podcast at all. Yes, would you agree?
Mm-hmm. And also not being a week behind on questions as well.
Indeed, because we have many questions. And yes, this is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And to get your questions answered, all you have to do is contact us. The main way you want to do that is via email, question@avrant.com. You email question@avrant.com, and those will go to our producer, Austin, who is joining us live this week. Very nice to have him around. Very fortunate, too. And so, yes, you want to email there. You can also CC rob@avrant.com and tom@avrant.com to make sure that we see those messages as well. We're also active on Facebook. You can reach us facebook.com/avrantpodcast. We have our main website, of course, which is avrant.com. You can leave a comment there. And you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow avrant_Tom for Tom. You can follow at First Reflect. For me, it's right there on my screen, staring me in the face if you're watching the video. At First Reflect, that's me. And there is at Austin Pond. That's Austin spelled with an E, not an I. And Austin also has his own podcast. It is called We Watch Movies. It's very confusing, given that title, what it's about. But Austin, why don't you let people know?
Well, it's actually, and I'll actually take a quote from someone who emailed us this week and who said he really appreciated my podcast for being a great podcast about rock harmonica players. So
right, that's right. Yep. So We Watch Movies tells you exactly what it's all about. And yeah, so once again, this is the show where we answer your home theater and AV questions. And we start off by thanking our listeners of the week. These are people who supported the podcast in some way, such as Fred, Mike, and Jason S. Fred, Mike, and Jason S. all left donations for the podcast to help support all the fees that we pay to keep this show on the air. And the way you can do that is by coming to avrant.com, the main website. Over on the right-hand side, there is a support the podcast, buy us a cup of coffee link there. You're not actually buying us coffee. That's just a metaphor for sending us a PayPal donation. The link there will take you to PayPal. You do not need an actual PayPal account. You can just use a credit card and help support the podcast financially. But that is not the only way to support the podcast that we recognize under our listeners of the week. We also thank people such as Mawani, who bought some Ascend acoustic speakers. I tweeted out they are currently running a summer sale where you can grab some B-stock Sierra 2s or try Ascend's new program where some of their bookshelf speakers, it's not all of their models, but some of them, their CBM 170s, their CMT 340s, or the Sierra 1 bookshelf speakers, they're now offering free shipping both ways, only for the continental United States. Sorry to our listeners in Canada or international, or even in Alaska and Hawaii for that matter. They're sticking with just the continental United States, but free shipping both ways. So for folks who have been hearing me talk up Ascend acoustic speakers for the past little while, and you've been wondering, hey, how do those actually sound? Now you can try at least those three models completely risk-free if you want. So Mawani did just that, and he let them know that he heard about it because of AV Rant. So that's really awesome. We love it when people get in contact with manufacturers or retailers, let them know that they heard about their services or products from the podcast. So another person who did that was Adriano. He had a Rel 205 subwoofer. Well, he sold that on Gumtree, and he replaced it with a pair of SVS SB 2000 subwoofers. Very nice. He also got them with SoundPath isolation feet. And since he's over in Europe, it was actually a reseller, and he convinced that reseller to throw in the set of isolation feet for free with the purchase of the dual subs. So very nice over there. Let them know it was all because of AV Rant buying those SVS products. And finally, Michael I. He let Gick Acoustics know that he bought some acoustic panels from them, and he's enjoying their effectiveness and intends to buy even more in the future, all thanks to AV Rant. So, gentlemen, thank you all so much for supporting the podcast.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. So what we're going to do here, we're going to let Austin pretty much read this entire topic list to take the burden off of me, because why would I want to do such a thing?
Yeah, you'll end up doing most of the rest of the talking. So.
That might be the case. We'll see what happens.
You may want to go ahead and read the news, though, because usually you have extra stuff to say.
Well, there is that, and it's short this week as far as actual news stories go. So the main one is that Integra, they have now released 4 new models. They're calling it a DRX series, which is a new alphabet soup series for Integra, but nevertheless, once again, these are basically rebadged Onkyo models, since Integra is the luxury arm of Onkyo. All of them are limited to 7.2 channels. So there are no 9 or 11 speaker models here. They're ranging in price from, what are they? They start at, what is it, $700 up to $1,500, something like that?
Yeah,
I think that's like listed in there. Yeah. So, okay, $800 is the low one, up to $1,700. Okay, I was a little off in those numbers. But 4 models here, all 7.2. All of them do have Atmos and DTS-X capability, however, limited to 5.2.2 because they top out at 7 speakers. But the main feature that kind of sets these apart is that they are some of the first AV receivers to internally support the MQA audio. That is the master quality authenticated audio from Meridian. And we're very dubious as to whether that is really an effective thing here at AV Rant. The whole claim is that you're getting CD quality, as in 44.1 kilohertz sampling with 16-bit audio. That's the format, but there's metadata on top of it. There's MQA metadata, which is supposed to restore whatever is supposedly lost by it not being 2496 audio, and it's all supposed to be authenticated by whoever created the master. And then, of course, there are the people in the mastering studios who are like, ooh, it sounds even better than the original master, meaning they have no idea what is actually going on there. Mm-hmm. So,
well, of course they're going to say that. You sit people down, you say, "Doesn't this sound better?" Yes, because you can't say, "Oh no, it doesn't," or "I can't tell," because you're supposed to be mastering experts. So,
well, obviously they can't tell because it's only at best it's supposed to sound exactly the same. That's what it's supposed to do.
Yes, if you couldn't tell, that's what I would expect.
Yeah. And because it's all a little bit dubious over at, well, you know what? I'm going to say it because Tom's not here. It's Shit Audio, SCHIIT. I'm not cursing. That is their name, Shit Audio. They have explicitly rejected MQA. Now, that's something that most companies don't do. Usually, if they're not supporting something, they just don't support it.
Yeah.
They just don't talk about it. It's pretty easy. But they explicitly put out a blog post explaining why none of their products have or will have MQA audio unless something changes. And I liked their explanation. I mean, for one, they're saying, look, Meridian is trying to get licensing fees out of every part of the chain. They're like, if you make a recording, pay us. If you have something that plays it back, pay us. If you want to make a product, you have to tell us all about it and how it works, and basically give up whatever secret sauce you might have in your engineering so that you can put MQA on it. It's like this. So they're all kind of backing away from all that. Plus, they're saying we don't really think it sounds any better, or could, based upon.
Can't see how it could. It doesn't.
Yeah. No. So honestly, good on them. I'm fine with taking that stance. And yes, if they can really prove, if Meridian can really prove that this thing is doing something beyond CD quality, which there's really no need to go beyond that.
No, CD quality is fine. It's fine.
It covers what the human ear can perceive. So that, should be all right. But anyway, that's all MQA. That was the news. So on to our comments. We'll take it away, Austin.
So Bill C. shared a Consumer Reports article, sort of following up on somebody recently sent in some like test track article or something. So this particular one was 5 songs to help you buy a great sound system. And they gave 5 different tracks and sort of described what you were supposed to be listening for in each one and what it could tell you about equipment you're testing. But it didn't seem, they didn't use very technical language. And so it kind of seemed to me like, I don't really know how useful this list is. So
yeah, well, being Consumer Reports, they stay away from getting too technical.
But it just didn't seem like they said much of any consequence.
And honestly, every description I read boiled down to delineation. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's really what they're talking about. They're saying this is a complex score, but you can clearly hear all the instruments separated from one another, or you can hear the effect of the room, or you can feel hear the reverberation that should be there and might, just sound muddled on a lesser speaker system. So all of it pretty much boiled down to delineation, which honestly, I'm fine with that. That is one of the things I certainly listen for when I'm listening to speakers or using test material is, can I do the thing I can do in real life, listening to real instruments, which is, if I focus on one particular instrument out of the ensemble, you should be able to do that. You can do that in real life, listening to real live instruments. So you should be able to do that with a good recording as well. So to me, that's fine advice. But yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of difference between mentioning specific test tracks specifically for treble performance, or specifically for female vocal or male vocal or choir vocal, or specifically for bass or something like that. It all pretty much boiled down to delineation. So it was kind of 5 examples of the same thing, but that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the title says to help you buy a great sound system. Yeah. So I guess really it's, is this great or is it not? So,
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
1 or 10. That's all that exists. Yeah. So that was about it for that one.
Nathan was excited to see Oppo's Facebook post showing the OLED front panel display for their upcoming UHD Blu-ray player. The post says coming soon, although calling their customer service line reveals it's still planned for late 2016, as in probably Christmas time.
Yeah.
So apparently that's their idea of soon.
It is soon for a small company.
Relatively soon. I mean, yeah, it's just 6 months. It's not
I guess what they're saying is, don't worry, it's not going to be 2-3 years. It's like
Yeah.
it's in the works, it's on its way. So yeah, I
It's better
tweeted.
than Emotiva soon.
That's yeah. I didn't want to have to say it, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, no, I did tweet to them and asked if they might be supporting Dolby Vision and if they were willing to make an official announcement that they were, because that would make them the first. So far, there are no other Ultra HD Blu-ray players officially announced with Dolby Vision support, but they didn't respond. They didn't tweet back. So
I expect I mean, they're Oppo. They always do. They support basically everything. Usually,
it's pretty much like if it can be supported,
yeah.
it will be supported when it comes to Oppo. So yeah, but we'll see. We have to see. And I mean, there hasn't been a single actual disc announced with Dolby Vision support yet. So we don't even know if that will be a thing. Maybe Ultra HD Blu-ray will just stick with baseline HDR10 and that'll be the end of it. So
yeah.
don't really know.
Might just end up being a streaming thing or something.
Could be. Well, anyway,
it's not going away.
That's right.
Dolby is going to make sure it doesn't go away. They'll stick it in something.
Yeah, and it's there on Vudu and it's there on Netflix. So those are two pretty big services. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway,
so, questions.
Mm-hmm.
I have a few left from last week. Brian has some updates on his Harmony remote issues from a few weeks ago. He did what Rob suggested to fix the remote app not showing up on his network. He deleted and reinstalled the app on his phone, and it showed up right away. So, turn it off and turn it back on again, basically.
Kinda.
A little more extreme than that, but
yeah.
Also, while rerunning the activity setups on the Harmony app, he ran across a checkbox in the setup options that read "Do Nothing." He changed all his activities to do that, and it solved the problem he was having of Harmony toggling through the audio inputs to the wrong input setting, which isn't something that you or Tom suggested. Apparently, he found it just digging through the menus.
Yeah. No, that's a great call. I hadn't thought of that initially, but yeah, it is one of the things where when you're setting up the activities for your display and for your AV receiver, one of the parts of the initial activity setup is it always asks what input should we switch this device to when you start this activity. And I had forgotten that one of the options is don't send out a command. Just leave the darn thing alone wherever I already have it. So yeah, great find. And that allows him to use his 5.1 analog, which on his particular AV receiver, the way the remote is set up, means pushing a button to toggle on or toggle off the analog audio, the multi-channel analog audio input. It's not amongst the other input options, which is a little bit unfortunate, but at least he found a workaround. So pleased about that.
Yeah, so now he can listen to his lossless audio and not bother his family with having to remember what buttons to press. And another thing that he found that it might be useful to know is when setting up the remote, the Harmony remote the first time, he had to change his DirecTV Genie remote to IR mode. And nowhere in the guides did it say that you could change it back to RF after he was done with the setup.
Right, yeah.
Although apparently you can, because he did change it back to RF a few weeks ago to re-enter the network password so that he could access the on-demand channels. And ever since, he's been able to close the door to his AV cabinet and still have the Harmony remote control everything. Because before, he was having to leave the door open slightly so that the IR could have line of sight.
Right, so he's got a Harmony hub, so the hub can sit inside of the cabinet, and so the controls that are going from the physical Harmony remote, or it could be from his smartphone using the Harmony app, that's all getting into the hub either via RF or Wi-Fi, and then the Harmony hub is blasting out the IR inside the cabinet, so everything inside the cabinet is still getting like soaked in IR signals, so that's all fine. And then for the actual DirecTV Genie remote, the separate remote, which I guess he still uses for some reason, he can do that via RF as well. Because yeah, it's not as though the DirecTV Genie box itself cares whether the signal is coming via IR or via RF. It was actually the physical remote itself, right, that he switched between IR mode and RF mode. So yep, that's good to know. The box doesn't care. It will take both.
Now, how was it that you said this name?
Mawani.
So in a large open living room with a 2.1 system that Mawani has, would the Asin Sierra 2 speakers be worth the extra money versus the Aperion Veris Grand bookshelf speakers?
Oh, such a tough call. And I'm not being facetious. That's a really tough call. I mean, So they are playing in different price brackets. And this is not a situation where the reason that the Sierra 2s cost more is strictly because of markup or retail or advertising or anything like that. It's quite the opposite, in fact.
Yeah, they're as cheap as he can possibly
Yeah,
build them.
I mean, Ascend has very low, unusually low profit margins for a company. So the reason the Sierra 2s cost as much as they do is because the parts genuinely cost more, and it is a significantly different speaker from the Hyperion Audio Varus Grand bookshelf speakers. It is using a ribbon tweeter. It's using a more advanced, they call it a curve woofer. It's woven polypropylene, and it's using a bamboo cabinet. So all of those things just inherently make it a bit more of an expensive speaker. Now, will the difference in sound, which I've got to say in my experience is, I don't think they sound the same. I wouldn't mistake one for the other. I genuinely believe that in a blind comparison, I could probably tell the two speakers apart, but would I call it better? Would I call it nearly twice as expensive better? I mean, that's a very personal choice of, is spending nearly twice as much money on a pair of speakers worth whatever incremental improvement you might hear in there? And of course, that's what he's asking, right? I mean, that's what he wants to know. He wants to hear an opinion.
Is it worth it?
I can give you the one man's opinion, which is that if what you're after are very small details, the type of things that we're talking about in that Consumer Reports thing, be it the delineation, the sense of realism, it's just, there's a slight improvement to my ear. The Sierra 2s are a slight improvement over the Hyperion Audio Varus Grands in terms of just sounding that little bit more realistic, that little bit better delineated. And I think a lot of that is due to the physically lighter in mass drivers that they're using, which of course can start and stop more quickly, giving you that faster transient response. I think they're overall the slightly better speaker. I certainly don't think they're twice as good. It's nothing like that. This is big time diminishing returns. But then you've got the other thing, which he's saying he's putting them in a large room, right? He's putting them in a large open living room, which means that the room itself is definitely playing a factor here, and how much you're going to be able to appreciate small differences in a setting where maybe you're a little bit seated farther away from the speakers, or you just have more room reverberation. You likely will have more reflections, more sound reinforcement coming from the large room.
Yeah, and whatever extra detail you might get might be lost in the room.
It might be smeared by just having, a more reflective room. On the other hand, sometimes if you're in a very small room with no treatments in it at all, if you're just in a hard, small, flat box, then that's going to give you more distracting reflections than a large room where at least any reflected sound had to travel a greater distance to bounce off of a surface first before it bounces over to your ear. So, I mean, Moani, I can't tell you for sure whether you will think that the difference, that the improvement is truly worth it. If you're willing to risk the return fee, the Sierra 2s do not fall under the new two-way shipping policy that Ascend has instituted. So you would be potentially out shipping costs if you were to audition it at your home and then send them back. Hyperion pays the shipping both ways. So in a sense, if your inclination is that you're the type of person who's willing to spend basically twice as much money for a small improvement, and I want to stress that, I think it's an improvement, but a small one. If you're the type of person who thinks that might be worth it to me, then I would say go ahead and purchase the Sierra 2s and then get the Hyperions and audition them against each other, A-B them, because then you can send back the Hyperions for free. You are out no money at all, and you will know for certain whether it was worth it if you think that the likelihood is that you'll appreciate the small improvement of the Sierra 2s, because then chances are you won't be sending those ones back. That's the way to be sure. And I think that's the best answer I can offer.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way but to try.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't a case of like, I have TV speakers, will the Sierra 2s sound better and be worth it? It's like, yes, they will.
Two very good speakers.
Yeah.
So, yeah. He also wonders, when hanging acoustic panels, how high on the wall should they be mounted?
Yeah, well, you want them to obviously be at the same level as your ears when you're seated. Now, most acoustic panels that we look at are generally 2 feet wide and 4 feet tall, which gives you a large range there to play with. But some are, going to be 2 feet by 2 feet, or there are even smaller acoustic panels that you could buy, or of course make yourself. You can make them any size you want if you're making them yourself. So the general rule, if you're looking at a panel that's about 2x2, or certainly in the case of being 2 feet wide and 4 feet tall, if you get them 2 feet off the ground, get the bottom of the panel 2 feet off the ground, then most of us, when we're sitting down, our ears are somewhere in the realm of about 3 feet off the ground, which would put you more or less in the middle of that 2-foot panel. If it's 2 feet tall, it puts you more or less in the middle of that panel height-wise if you have the bottom of the panel 2 feet off the ground. So that's the rule of thumb. Yeah.
Infinite Gary.
Mm-hmm.
In the future, when he has an Ultra HD Blu-ray player with
it's
both
coming.
HDR10, yes, it is. He will, with both HDR10 and Dolby Vision capability, assuming that ever exists.
Right. Yeah.
To pair with his LG OLED TV, will he need to have separate calibrations performed for both HDR formats?
As far as I know, yes. Even though they both use the same electro-optical transfer function, and that's the set of instructions that say when the signal gives you this level of light, here is exactly how many nits you, the display, ought to be outputting. It is a set table, basically like a table of contents for the thing to look up and say, when the signal says be this bright, here is how many nits I should be putting out as the display. So both HDR10 and Dolby Vision use that same set of instructions. They call it SEMPTE 2084. So on that front, having that set once, which would mean, they're putting up a grayscale ramp when they're calibrating and just checking that the light output level is equal to what the signal is sending the display as a set of instructions. That should be cross-compatible, but you are definitely going to want to check that when you send out a Dolby Vision test pattern, that it adheres to the way Dolby Vision works, which is they actually create a thing called their golden reference for each and every display model that is a Dolby Vision display. They actually work hand in hand with the manufacturers, and they measure, okay, how bright can this particular model of display get? What range of colors can it show? And based on that, Dolby creates all the conversion tables to make sure that when the signal is coming in as Rec 2020 color, that's all being mapped properly to the capabilities of that particular model of display. And that when the HDR metadata comes in and says, okay, this was mastered on a display that can get to 4,000 nits, but we know that this particular model of Dolby Vision display can only go up to 800 nits or 1,000 nits or whatever it is, that all of that gets mapped correctly. So that's all coming from a Dolby Vision signal. Then you want to send it an HDR10 signal, which has, as we've been talking about, this static metadata where at the very beginning it just says, here's the brightest this movie ever gets, here's the widest range of colors that this movie ever displays. Now you, the display, you go ahead and map that however the manufacturer decided to map that. There's no third party overlooking that and saying, here's how to do it. It's up to the manufacturer, which means that, in a sense, HDR10 calibration, it's almost like a misnomer at this point. There's no strict standard because they can send it as an HDR10 test signal that mimics static metadata that says, okay, the mastering display was 4,000 nits or 1,000 nits or 10,000 nits, whatever it is, but they're just mimicking that. And then you don't have, as the calibrator, a strict standard saying, well, here's what the display ought to do in response to that. It's like you can measure what the display did do, but then you can't really do anything about it as the calibrator. But what you can still do, of course, is make sure that when it says to be white, you're getting white, not some off-white shade. You can still calibrate the color to be accurate, at least as far as the grayscale goes. Again, if the display doesn't, none of the displays are getting all the way out to Rec 2020, but if it doesn't get all the way out to the DCI P3 color gamut, and yet the signal is saying display those colors, well, again, it's the manufacturer in the HDR10 system deciding, how do we actually map these colors down to what the display can actually do? And again, as the calibrator, you don't know what the TV ought to be showing you in response to the signal, but you can measure what it is showing you and at least draw up the table and show your customer, well, here's what your display does. I don't know if it's right or not.
Hmm.
So in that sense, yes, there are two. The Dolby Vision standard is much more. There actually is a standard for the calibrator to work with, but you will need both, because when the HDR10 metadata comes in, you'll want to at least make sure your grayscale is accurate and that it is tracking to that SMPTE 2084 electro-optical transfer function. Those two things are set. And they can at least calibrate to that. And you'll have to send two different signals, which essentially means two different calibrations.
Gary now owns, as we know, many TVs, but
Mm-hmm.
a 50-inch, a 55-inch, and a 60-inch flat
Right.
screen. He knows they're all 16 by 9, but he can't help but notice that the 55-inch appears to look wider. What's causing this perception?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and throw up some images here, and it's going to take me one little second because I'm trying to do many things all at once, but there we go. I think that should have it. Austin can tell me if he's able to see it. So right there, we're looking at what should be his 50-inch and his 60-inch televisions. Those are the older ones that he has. And I just wanted to point out, this is for anyone who's watching the YouTube video, but of course I'll describe it for folks who are listening to the audio-only version. They have thick bezels. They have thick frames around the image. And then I'll switch over here to his 55-inch. And if you're seeing the video, but just to describe it, it has a very thin frame, a very thin bezel. And honestly, that's what's causing the optical illusion. And if I sort of switch back and forth for people who are watching the images, you can sort of see how just overall, just having that frame around the image, it gives you the perception of when there's less of a frame, that there's like more of a picture. Right? Which, of course, is the whole point. That's why they're putting these very skinny frames on things now, as well as just to reduce weight and cost, I'm assuming. But yeah, it's an optical illusion. We know the aspect ratio is the same. It's 16 by 9. So.
It actually, in those pictures, having the smaller bezel does make a difference, but to me, it actually makes it look taller than
Okay.
the other two, not wider. So,
Yeah.
but that's what's going on.
Yeah. Optical illusion. It is definitely the same ratio of image. One is not actually any physically wider than the other.
Also, he still has his Kuro that he's had since 2008, his plasma TV. How long should he expect it to last before it dies? And is there any way to track how many hours it's been used? Is it in the service menu maybe?
Yeah, so honestly, I am not sure on that second part. I know within the user menus, at least of my Kuro, there's nothing that indicates it on something I can just bring up. And I've never delved into the service menu. You have to look up the special code to give you access to that. It's certainly possible, but I'm not sure on that second part in terms of tracking how many hours. Probably it's in there somewhere. But as far as those late generation plasmas, this applied to the Panasonics as well. They were all making claims that it should last for 100,000 hours. But that didn't necessarily tell you how long it's going to keep looking its best, because plasmas do dim over time. And to be fair, the majority of the dimming they do is quite early on. There's like a fairly steep drop off from when they're brand new out of the box to like within the first 100 or 200 hours, they kind of dim a not insignificant amount, which is why professional calibrators always recommended leaving your plasma TV on, using it for like 200 hours before they came in and did a professional calibration, because it was going to shift. After that, they settle down and they're pretty much stable for somewhere between 30 and 60,000 hours. After about the 60,000 hour mark, they might be about half as bright as when they were brand new out of the box. But again, that's a little bit misleading, because the majority of that drop was like right away. And then they gradually dim a little bit more over time. So honestly, anywhere between about 60 and 100,000 hours of use, that plasma should be fine. It will probably keep functioning after that, unless you keep it in a very hot or very humid environment and like burn out the power supply or something. But the panels themselves last an awfully long time. So you're probably fine.
Now, do they actually dim evenly among the colors?
Yeah, not necessarily. Yeah, not necessarily. As particularly like if you were someone who was watching a lot of 4:3 content and had black bars on both sides, or if the only thing you ever watched was like CinemaScope aspect movies and you always had the black bars on the top and bottom, or if you were playing a lot of video games on it, maybe it had a heads up display that's always on there. Plasmas got way better as far as burn in or uneven wear of the panel, but they weren't completely immune to it, not ever. So if you did always have static things always in the same place, then yeah, those will age faster or slower if they're always showing black. So it is possible. So yeah, try to fill up that screen with changing content at least most of the time.
John on Facebook loves our podcast.
Yay!
I say our in sort of the royal way. It's not really mine, but yes, we're the only two here.
You do work.
I do. Only for a short period of time, though. It's been going on a long time before I was here. But are there any other audio-specific podcasts that we recommend as worth a listen?
It was funny because I was, going through my list of podcasts that I have, and I'm like, none of these are like audio-specific. I mean, even this podcast, AV Rant, is not audio-specific. We talk about video as well.
There's a V in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know of any. I don't think, because I mean because we've answered this question before, just in terms of sort of home theater, other podcasts, and then you sort of have the HT guys, you have home theater geeks, right. But none of those are audio specific.
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, I will go through the ones that I have on my collection that I listen to frequently. You already mentioned some of them, but HDTV and Home Theater Podcast, that's the HT guys. They've been around for ages and are super popular, and you probably listened to them already if you managed to find us. Home Theater Geeks that Austin mentioned, that's Scott Wilkinson from AVS Forum, and does fantastic interviews with people from all over the industry. So very often that is going to be audio related, but certainly not always. And he does a lot of video on that one as well. I would say the AV Forums podcast. Those are guys over in the UK, but certainly their focus isn't strictly audio, not by any means. And I kind of disagree with their audio editor a lot of the time. But certainly worth a listen. And then Dolby does have their collection of podcasts, and that is mostly focused on audio. And Emotiva, if you're sort of interested in hearing about their products, they have their own podcast, but of course it is focused on their products, which are audio products, but they're not talking about the industry at large so much. So those were the ones that I grab.
Yeah, I can't really think of anything else. So... And I hardly listen to, I still listen to Home Theater Geeks most of the time, but I've never really listened to the HT guys very much. I listen now and then, but yeah, but I can't really think of any.
But honestly, yeah, I mean, folks, get in contact with us. You know what? I'm going to try and throw out the contact info more than Tom does. So so get in touch with us for something like this. It'd be great to hit us up on Facebook, facebook.com/AVRant podcast, and list the other podcasts that you listen to over there. But also join us at our website, avrant.com. You could leave a comment there or email us question@avrant.com to let us know. And you can hit us up on Twitter. I am at First Reflect. Tom is at avrant_Tom, and Austin is at Austin Pond. Austin spelled with an E, not an I. So yeah, get in touch with us. Let us know, and we'll pass that along to John.
And that's all the questions from last week. So new questions. Johnny first thanks us for our advice on his brother-in-law's Zone 2 issue. It looks like they'll be going with the cheap second receiver option.
Yeah. What a shaking my head moment to have to give that advice, but honestly, that was the solution. Two receivers.
Zone 2. All these years, it still doesn't work the way it should. But also, this month, he'll finally be able to upgrade his 9-year-old Yamaha RX V2700 receiver. It's performed well over the 9 years he's had it, but it's time for something with newer tech. His current system is 7.2, but he wants to have 7.2.2 capability with top middles for the future. He also wants Odyssey Multi QXT, and having been converted by the podcast's current fandom of Denon and Marantz, he's looking at the Denon X4200. Or the Marantz 6010, both of which are $899 at Accessories for Less.
All true.
Being that his front three speakers are powered externally by an Emotiva XPA3, are there any significant benefits of one receiver over the other, and which one would we buy?
So short answer is no. There really aren't anything I would call truly significant differences. However, there are some small detail differences that might make the decision for you. So the Denon X4200W, it has Denon Link. The Marantz does not. I have no idea why anyone would ever use Denon Link. It only works with Denon transports, like a Denon CD player or a Denon Blu-ray player, and it really isn't necessary or does anything, but it has it. Marantz does it. But the main one is Oro 3D, which if for some reason you want to pay $200 and have the ability to decode Oro 3D or use their Oro-matic up mixer, the X4200W can do that. The SR6010 from Marantz cannot. It is the lone 9 or 11 speaker capable model out of both Denon and Marantz that for whatever reason cannot be upgraded to support Oro 3D. So that would probably be the thing that would decide it in favor of the Denon if that's something you really want. Now, over on the other side, the Marantz SR6010 does have 7.1 analog audio inputs. The Denon X4200W does not. So if you have an old SACD player that has to send out 5.1 analog instead of being able to send things out via HDMI, then that would be a reason to get the Marantz. Then the other little detail is the Denon claims to have slightly higher wattage per channel for its built-in amplifiers. The SR6010, supposedly the preamp stage of that one is like a little bit quieter because they use their Marantz's HDAM preamp outputs, which it doesn't. There's no difference. I'm sorry. to the people who believe there is, they're just
not.
The pre-outs from the X4200 are just fine. So I don't know if any of those tiny details myself, I'd probably go for the Marantz just because I like the way it looks better.
They do look significantly different.
They do look different. Their front panels look different. But yeah,
whichever one you like the look of. Pretty much. Honestly, it really doesn't matter.
It's like Oro 3D or 7.1 analog inputs. Like
nobody cares about.
I doubt you're using either of those. So
no.
Yeah,
I don't know what you're watching if you're using Oro 3D. There's not much. Jonathan has many quotes for us to have opinions on.
Okay.
He found a very detailed explanation and criticism of the current HDR and WCG systems.
Wide color gamut.
He pulled a few specific quotes and would like us to comment on them. This is from lightillusion.com.
Right.
Do you actually want me to read these quotes, or do you just want to have
paraphrase them? That's fine. They're not that long. They look longer.
Yeah, okay. All right, fine. I'll just read them. The biggest issue with HDR displays is that they can actually be painful to watch due to what is often termed as excessive eye fatigue. To actually gain benefit from the concept of HDR, the actual viewing angle the display would need to occupy would be in the order of 45 degrees, which, with an average large TV of 55 inches, is 55 inches a large TV?
It is to them.
Would mean sitting just 65 inches from the screen.
Yeah, so overall, I just wanted to comment on this article. Overall is very much a critique of HDR and sort of trying to point out the areas where they think that the whole system as a whole is lacking. Areas where maybe this might not even be the way we ought to go. And to me, there's a little bit of the to what end, because it's already here and done, and I don't know what you're going to do about it at this point. And some of it seems to be speculative, which I didn't actually look at the date at which this was written, and maybe they were trying to get out ahead of it and say, here are some things to try and do before HDR comes out or whatever. But I sort of just in general want to throw it all to, like, if you go to an actual Dolby cinema, where, if you're not watching HDR at home, you can watch it in a full cinema setting. And anyone who has seen a Dolby cinema setup unequivocally says, this looks substantially better than any other theater I've ever been in. So it's kind of ultimately it looks better. So maybe don't worry about it too much, like criticizing the underlying things, which, yes, maybe there are issues, because there's kind of issues with anything that ever technologically advances, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater just because there are some theoretical criticisms. But anyway, to get to this specific idea, they are talking about the idea that in real life, let's say you're sitting inside and then you look outside, someone opens a door and it's a bright sunny noon day outside, and then you turn your eyes back to the interior, which might be a lot dimmer, that there is this time it takes for your eyes to adjust, and it takes a lot longer for our eye to adjust to low light levels than it does for the transition from having been in low light going to bright light. Your eyes adjust fairly quickly to that, but if you're already used to bright light and then you go to low light, it takes a lot longer for our eye to adjust to that change. So he's saying, if the idea of HDR is to mimic real life, then you need this huge screen so that if you look at this small area of the screen that's very bright, then you could look to another part of the screen that is dimmer, and your eyes could adjust, and you wouldn't have to have the thing where the entire screen is within your central field of view, and therefore your eye never has an opportunity to adjust. It just sort of stays static at whatever the brightest object is if everything is within your field of view. All of that is a little bit off.
Well, and a 45 degree viewing angle is pretty large, but it's not that much larger than what really you're supposed to have anyway. I mean, it's on the larger size, but I mean, just calling a 55-inch TV a large TV at this point is kind of odd, but it's not. Well, yeah, I understand the needing to have it be a large field of view, but I don't know.
It really all comes down to, what did they do in this movie? Because, I mean, the HDR system, just in terms of what the signal can hold, if some crazy director wanted to go out there and show you a blazingly bright, everything is 500 nits and brighter in this scene, and have you get used to that, and then transition immediately to something that has nothing but shadows and dark, and for some reason that's what the movie maker wanted to do, well, the system isn't going to stop them from doing that. But if
but it doesn't really stop them from doing it without HDR.
That's
because
right.
There's still often times where you'll have a transition between scenes where you were in a dark scene and then suddenly you're outside and it's bright, and there is kind of a moment of sort of, I guess, kind of eye strain or something, but where you do have to readjust, and that's not even with HDR. So
yeah. But I mean, in real life, if you're, say, outside driving at dawn or at twilight time, most of what's around you is fairly dim, but then there's a few little specific bright, it could be the headlights that are coming at you, or it could be, just something, small little highlights within your field of view. They could be right in your central field of view. And if that's what the movie is recreating, then this really isn't any different than looking at. So they seem to be focused on this one idea of being mostly in a dark area with one particularly bright patch of the image, and you, the viewer, having the choice to either move your eyes to put that particularly bright thing in your central field of view, or having the option of the image being large enough for you to look away from it. That's where this particular comment seemed to come in, and I'm like,
why are you looking away anyway?
It matters so much what the movie contains that's a very specific thing to be worried.
It may not. Well, and this actually isn't anything that I don't think they talked about. I don't know. I didn't read the whole article. Oh, and there is no date on it, so I have no idea when it was. But this won't matter with projectors because it doesn't already. But with HDR direct view displays, is this going to be, in a way, making bias lights even more important than they already were?
Well, you know what? All that is coming up in the next, the future quotes. So let's delve into them.
Okay, I didn't actually see. All right. So the next one is, it's worth pointing out that due to the logarithmic response of the human eye to changes in light levels, the present-day standard dynamic range Rec. 709 standard of 100 nits is actually around 50% of the peak HDR 10,000 nit level, and there is a graph that accompanies this part of the article. Okay. Is that correct? That doesn't sound correct.
That's backwards. Because like it is logarithmic, so the difference that it takes for our eye to notice that something is brighter, right? Mm-hmm. So as things get brighter and brighter, it takes an ever increasing amount of actual photons hitting the photoreceptors in our eye. It exponentially grows how much more has to be hitting our eye for us to perceive it as having been brighter, right? So I guess in a way that's the numbers are a little off. I mean, in the system, it is true that the 50% mark of the system is used to describe 100 nits, right? So all the values from 0 up to 512 are used to describe from black to 100 nits, and then everything from 513 all the way up to 1024, because it's a 10-bit system that's being used. All of those values encompass the range from 100 nits to 10,000 nits. And that's because you don't need as many values because it's exponential growth. It has to go, considerably higher before our eye notices it. So, I'm not sure exactly what they're meaning there, but I mean, it's true that 50% of the signal is dedicated to just describing from 0 to 100 nits. And then the remaining 50% is describing from 101 to 10,000 nits. And then that more or less tracks the way our eye works as well, because you need more and more. So I'm not sure if that's a criticism or they're just pointing it out or what they're trying to
what they're trying to say.
Saying that, I'm not entirely sure, but
I mean, really, nothing does 10,000 nits anyway, except for that prototype liquid-cooled display that they had.
No, even that only goes up to 4,000.
The
only thing that went this bright was they took a full-size movie projector and used lenses to shrink down its light to only project like a 42-inch image. So all the light of a full commercial movie theater was being focused into just a 42-inch image size, and then I think they actually got up to 20,000 nits when they did that. But yeah, nothing's doing that.
No, and I don't think you want it to. I don't want.
I think
don't want to wear sunglasses watching.
I think all they're trying to say with this quote is that the SDR range that we already have is more important than the range that is being given to us by this expanded HDR. That what we already have is the lion's share of what we care about, and then this is just adding like a little bit, which is true. That's true.
Yeah. As stated previously, this means that for most scenes, the average picture level of HDR material will match that of regular standard dynamic range imagery. The result is that in less than ideal viewing environments where the surrounding room brightness level is relatively high, the bulk of the HDR image will appear very dark, with shadow detail becoming very difficult to see, as the eye's constricted pupil will just not be able to discern shadow detail. To be able to view HDR imagery, environmental light levels will have to be very carefully controlled, far more so than for standard dynamic range viewing.
And this is exactly what Joe Kane was pointing out as well. And they're all correct. Because as I talked about earlier, with this electro-optical transfer function that they're using now, the signal says this, it is mapped precisely to a nit output level. It's not a relative thing. It's not a curve where you can shift the whole thing up or down to suit what's around you. It's like, this means this, and that's it, locked in. And so, yeah, this is the concern. When we're watching standard dynamic range, which is supposed to have the brightest peaks being 100 nits, you're supposed to be watching that in a dim environment too. That's the way it's intended. But because that is using a gamma curve where you can shift the whole thing up and down, well, you can move the peaks up to 200, 400 nits. The black level will rise along with it. But if the whole goal is to have everything visible above the ambient light around you, that's fine. That's what you want to do, so that things that were only a tiny bit brighter than absolute black are now visible the way they were supposed to be. So this is a concern. This is a very valid concern, and this applies to both HDR10 and Dolby Vision, because they have said this signal means this light output, not a relative amount based on wherever you shifted things. So they're right about that.
And what is it? It's supposed to be, 10 maximum ambient light is supposed to be, 10% of either average or peak brightness of the display, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the rule of thumb, because there isn't really a super duper strict thing for that. But I think what they do is they put up like a window. I think it's like a window that's 10% of the screen, and they show that at full brightness, and then the backlight should be like 10% of that.
Yeah.
So it's got, basically the light should be dim. That's what it's saying.
It should be dim.
The light should be dim, not bright, not watching in a sunlit room. That's not the intent.
Well, and this may be able to be solved just by people having to get used to mastering for HDR or color correcting for HDR. So you have to just shift, since you have the headroom now, you can just shift everything up a little.
But then the question becomes, if you master it that way, what happens for the person watching in the fully blacked out room. Now everything is too bright. Average
that's
picture.
true.
No, so I mean they're correct. This is the real concern. This is the concern that Joe Kane had, and this is actually the reason why for television broadcast, this idea of hybrid log gamma, which they talk about in this article, that's what the BBC is proposing, is using hybrid log gamma. And the idea is that that first 50%, that first area from 0 to 100, is using the old gamma curve. That it's going back to that, and only the HDR section, the areas from 100 nits and above, will be using metadata and sort of this amount means this light output thing, so that you can shift the bottom portion, which includes all the shadow detail. Once you're over 100 nits, we don't care. It doesn't matter how bright your room is. That's fine. We can leave it alone. But that so that you can shift the bottom portion of the screen, and that's why Joe Kane was proposing maybe let's just use an SDR system, and then allow for it to go brighter. So that is the argument. That's exactly why the hybrid log gamma came into the idea, and it very well might be the better solution. Right now we're focusing on movies. We're not focusing on TV broadcasts anymore. But it does make a lot of sense instead of it being this means this light output. Yeah.
Fourth quote, and actually I think it's the last quote from this article. And to end, a question regarding color perception for those of you home cinema enthusiasts. You watch a new film release in the cinema in digital projection using a DCI XYZ color space envelope for projection containing DCI P3 imagery. You then purchase the same film on Blu-ray and watch it on your Rec 709 BT 1886 calibrated home cinema environment. Do you perceive any loss in image color fidelity, assuming the Blu-ray master has been generated correctly? The reality is that there are very few colors. All right.
We can leave it go there. It goes on and on. Well, I mean, this is unfair because nobody's watching it side by side.
Well, no.
And then to directly answer his question, yeah, sometimes. Like, for example, if you watch Deadpool in the theater and then you watch it at home, you probably won't, unless you're paying attention, you probably won't care. But his suit is a deeper shade of red in the theater than it is at home watching it on the Blu-ray, because that deep shade of red in his costume is outside the Rec 709 color gamut. If you know what one of the double-decker buses looks like in London in real life, and then you watch it on Blu-ray, it's not the same shade of red. That shade of red is outside. If you know what a Coke can looks like.
Coca-Cola red. Yeah, it's been a problem forever.
We've only mentioned red in this instance, but it applies for other shades as well. Not so much green. That's really only neon green that exists outside of Rec 709. But like
which
blue,
they actually mention here.
Yeah, there are some deep shades of blue that just can't be displayed. So, and yet they can within the DCI-P3 color gamut. So, on very specific instances, to answer this question directly, yes. And of course, the majority of images, majority of colors fall within Rec 709. That's why it was selected. That's the whole idea, is that the majority of what we see in everyday life falls in there. It's only the extreme examples that fall outside. But
and really, since you're not comparing them side by side, does it really matter? I don't think it really matters.
Give us more colors. What does it hurt?
This one sure, is more colors is fine, but if it's not quite all of the more colors, still, it's more.
I guess they're worried because not all displays are going to be equal, and therefore from display to display,
but they've never been.
Difference a bit. Yeah, I know.
No two film prints are equal either. We've never had identical copy to copy.
Supposed to be.
Yes, but they're not exactly.
Yeah,
and they're not the next time you show them either. So, so then continuing criticizing HDR, since apparently there's a lot of that going on. Another article points out that HDR is too dim for daytime. This is from HD TV Test, and a white paper posted at SpectraCal, which states that for HDR, the industry is considering 5 nits as a desirable surround luminance level. I guess that's the ambient level.
Yes, yeah. That's very dim.
It's very dim.
That's really, really dim.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I think that might be too dim.
That's a nearly blacked out room. That is a very, very dim room.
That doesn't deal with the eye strain of a direct view display.
Yeah, no, I mean this is the very valid criticism that we hadn't maybe entirely thought through before this whole system came up. It works for movie theaters. In movie theaters, we know the movie theater is going to be dark. It's never dark enough.
But that's a projector.
Yeah, because the
So
law states you have to have exit lights, and ideally those wouldn't even be there. But we know it's going to be very, very dark. And then bringing it home, it works if you're in a dark room. It works if you're in a dedicated theater. But this is definitely a concern. And this is what happens when if you get a professional calibration done, why they had ISF day and night modes, right?
yes.
Because one allowed them to raise the average light output entirely so that when you're watching during the day, shadows aren't all just crushed into black by your eye, not by the display itself, but your eye just not being able to see things that are only a little bit brighter than absolute black. So really the solution here is that they're just going to have to give us 2 HDR modes, an HDR night and an HDR day mode, right?
Which seems totally possible. I don't see why they couldn't do that.
Entirely possible. The other option is to allow for that first 50% of the signal to be adjusted independently of the second 50% of the signal, to allow us to shift those first 100 nit reigns, move all of that up. That would be the other thing. But it is a valid criticism of HDR displays that are out right now. Because most of them, when they go into HDR mode, they max out their backlight, they max out their contrast range, and there is no more headroom to allow for a day mode. And that is a very valid criticism. However, that could be updated with firmware, right? That's not something that is absolutely stuck in the hardware that could never be changed.
Yeah, and it's not a limitation of the brightness of the backlight or anything. So
no, because we're worried about the dim side,
the dimness,
of things. Yeah. Right. The max light output is always going to max out, but it's going to be way above whatever the ambient light is. So we're not really worried. So yeah, basically with a firmware update to existing displays or for future displays, allowing for a day and a night mode within HDR and within SDR, like we already have in SDR, this can be solved. But it is a valid criticism. It's just, I think there's a solution.
So Jonathan says, could this make HDR into a highly niche market or even undesirable altogether?
Not if they fix it.
No, not if they fix it. I mean, and right now it's still so early in HDR that it's not surprising that there's still these issues to shake out. So
yeah, but it's a good criticism.
Yeah, there are some concerns to have. Moving over to audio. He received his Focal Little Bird speakers and has set them up as his surround backs. He's enjoying them so far and was happy with how easy it was to conceal the speaker wires behind his acoustic panels. Great.
I'm going to try and show an image. Let's see. Click over to me. Click over to this. And then there they are.
So he did end up just sitting them on top of the panels, didn't he?
They pretty much look like they're sitting on top of his acoustic panels. It doesn't look like he has mounted them to the wall, that's for sure. No. They are very small and light, so I think those acoustic panels are at least 4 inches thick. So that worked, and then he can actually send the speaker wire up behind the acoustic panel and basically not see it. So it all looks pretty darn slick, I gotta say. Good job, Jonathan.
Since he added the new speakers, he's rerun Odyssey. He left the 120 hertz crossover point for the new Little Bird speakers, but he manually raised the crossover of his other 5 speakers to 80 hertz. This got him wondering, we've mentioned several times that Odyssey doesn't actually set the crossover frequencies. Instead, it's the receiver manufacturer that makes the decision. Why? And why do they always seem to err on the side of setting the crossover frequency lower rather than higher?
You might have
to make people feel good about their speakers, maybe? I don't know.
No, I mean, when we talked to Chris Kyriakakis, this was something that he pointed out that this is not something that what Odyssey does is it measures, and then it passes that data along. It says here's what we got, and then it's up to the AV receiver manufacturer to decide what they want to do with that frequency measurement. Most of them look for where the speaker on the low end, like anywhere below 250 hertz, they look for where is it 3 decibels or 6 decibels quieter, and then they tend to select that as the crossover frequency. And of course, sometimes the reason there's a dip 3 or 6 decibels down is because of the room interactions, not because of the speaker itself. But nevertheless, that's not a horrible thing to do. It's saying, well, at this frequency, for whatever reason, the speaker got quieter than the linear range above that. So that's where we're going to set to choose the crossover. They seem to err on the side of going low because there is this idea that's still out there, certainly among audiophiles, that if you could, you would play bass frequencies out of every individual speaker. That somehow that's the ideal, and that idea is still very prominent out there. And we are trying to get as many people as we can who will listen to us and give us a chance to get away from that idea that the much better solution is to use multiple subwoofers, get yourself uniform bass, then equalize that bass to be linear, because since it's uniform, now it will be linear everywhere. And once you've done that, and that's being handled by subwoofers, then there's really no reason to have your speakers play any lower than they need to match up with where that subwoofer is nice and uniform and linear. But that is relatively new thinking on the topic. And there are people who are entrenched in the idea that full range speakers all around you would be the ideal if you could do it. And I guess if you were in a wide open field, then fine. But we all have walls.
We're not. Yes, we're not in open fields.
That's the best answer I can give you, Jonathan.
Maybe some people are, but yes.
Old thinking still stuck.
And old thinking in audio is hard to kill. I mean, vinyl is still better, remember. Look how many years. That's been going on way longer than we've known that subwoofers are the way to go. So, Carl wants to use his Amazon Echo Dot in combination with his Sonos system. Is there some way to do that?
So there's the two sides of this. There's the one side that says, do you want Alexa to be coming through your Sonos speakers? And do you want any services that come through the Amazon Echo Dot, such as Sonos, because that works directly through Amazon Echo now? Do you want that played through your Sonos system? And if that's all you're asking, can you use the Amazon Echo Dot essentially as a source device? Then yes, you can, because it has an analog stereo output. And some Sonos devices, like the Sonos Connect or the largest of their speakers, the Play 5 speaker, they have left and right, red and white analog audio inputs. So you can put any device into a Sonos Connect or into the Play 5 speaker and say, use the analog stereo input, and now that's your source. So on that side, that's the way to integrate Amazon Echo as a source, or to be able to hear Alexa through your Sonos system speakers in any room of the house. But I don't really think that's what he's asking. I think he wants to be able to voice control his Sonos system.
Which you might kind of, not easily, officially, but kind of.
Exactly. Officially, no, not yet. And in fact, the CEO of Sonos has said they're more interested in creating their own voice control system than with attempting to integrate. In a way, they have a point, because there's multiple out there, right? There's Siri, there's Google Assistant, there's Cortana, and there's Alexa. So instead of trying to integrate with all of them officially, they're more interested in creating their own voice control system. So officially, the answer is no. Unofficially, you could use IFTTT. That's the if this, then that software system that you have to program yourself. Although it's fairly simple programming, it is literally if this, then that. So if I say, and you can decide what the phrase is going to be, but if the Amazon Echo hears the following phrase, tell this other device that's connected to my system, which would be your Sonos, to do this. So you could create the command, Alexa, tell my Sonos system to play Pandora, or something along that lines. And unfortunately, the language is very poor, because in the Amazon Alexa system, when you're doing something outside of what Alexa already understands and officially supports, the language is, Alexa, tell my blank to do blank. That's the language you end up having to use, which is not super intuitive. But that's the workaround. That's currently how you would get Sonos to be voice activated by Alexa. You'd have to use IFTTT and some less than intuitive language.
So kind of.
kind of. Yeah.
Joseph is looking for a professional calibrator. What tips do we have on finding a good one?
Yeah, this is a great question, because we've been mentioning professional calibration, and one thing to warn is, right now, if you're doing HDR, even professional calibrators are not super certain on what they ought to be doing. It works for Dolby Vision. Dolby Vision gives them golden reference standards to actually calibrate to, but HDR10, nobody out there is really sure how we're supposed to be handling this thing. So it's an interesting time for professional calibrators. But there's two main bodies that basically certify people to be video calibrators, either ISF, that's the Imaging Science Foundation, or THX. Most of us are familiar with THX showing up as an audio thing, but they also certify people on the video side as well. So you can go directly to their websites just to see lists of THX certified installers in your area. We'll have these links posted at avrant.com. So come to avrant.com. That's where we post links for anything that we're talking about or products that we mention. So yeah, you can go there. They have a map. You can select your area or type in your city and state, or city and province, or however things are listed in your country, and look up THX certified installers. Now, not all THX certified installers are THX video calibrators, but at least it whittles down your list and you can start calling them and saying, are you a THX certified video calibrator? If so, what level? How much training do you have? How many calibrations have you done? Et cetera, et cetera. A similar thing exists for the Imaging Science Foundation. They have their ISF certified dealers, and dealers are supposed to be ISF certified video calibrators as well. Now, knowing whether they're actually good or not, it's like hiring any contractor. There's no guarantee. You know, they got certified, they went through the course, but the course is like 2 or 3 days, and then they're supposed to have done a certain number of calibrations under THX. Under ISF, it's kind of like, you studied for 3 days and passed the written test, and then off you went. You're certified. So knowing whether they're really good or not is tough. I would suggest going over to AVS Forum, honestly. Go to AVS Forum. They actually have an entire thread that is just ISF calibrators. Please list where you're located and what services you provide. They have a similar list, I believe, for THX, although I didn't have the link readily available, but they certainly have the ISF one. And then you can just ask for anyone to either say, yes, I've dealt with this person and they're good, or talk with them directly and try and suss out whether they're good as essentially hiring a contractor.
So Infinite Gary is back.
Oh, yeah.
For more questions. In the new 4K OLED TVs, like his LG, how does the up conversion know what colors to add to make the expanded color gamut signal?
Right. So this is talking about when you're watching something that is not encoded in HDR, right? So if you're getting an Ultra HD Blu-ray, or you're watching an HDR signal off of Vudu or off of Netflix or off of Amazon, then the metadata tells the display, here's how wide the colors go. And then if it's HDR10, it's up to LG to have decided, well, here's how we're going to map those colors to what I can actually do. Or if it's Dolby Vision, then Dolby Vision kind of decided how that all works. But when you're watching regular SDR content, like regular Blu-rays or any HD content off your cable box or something like that, which is, of course, still the vast majority of what we're watching, natively, or I shouldn't, natively is going to come up later. So I'll say the default is the word I should use. The default is that it goes to the Rec 709 color space. Exactly like we would expect. It's supposed to display things accurately. You can select what color to use standard color, which means it'll map things to where it's supposed to be mapped. Things will show up using Rec 709 colors, but you do have the option of expanding to the native color gamut of the display. And that's where it's doing this false, we're going to take the colors that are in the signal, which are encoded in Rec 709, and we're going to guess at saturating them further, making deeper shades of red, green, and blue than are actually in the signal to use the full capabilities of the display, because the display can show deeper shades of red, green, and blue. So let's try and falsely expand that. So he's asking how exactly does it do that? Well, it basically just goes, here is fully saturated red in Rec 709. Here's a signal that says, just display red, don't have any amount of blue or green in the signal. We're just showing the deepest shade of red that exists in Rec 709. And instead of showing that accurately, we're going to stretch that out and make it even a deeper shade of red for what the display can do. And then we're going to do the same thing for green and blue. When a pure green or a pure blue comes in, instead of showing it accurately, we're going to expand it out, make it a deeper shade that the TV can show, but it wasn't actually in the signal. What really matters is that when all of those colors are mixed equally and should equal white, that it still equals white, that it hasn't somehow changed it into an off shade of white. But basically nothing you're looking at now is accurate. Everything got stretched out. Everything is a deeper shade than was actually in the signal. So the easy answer is don't turn that on. Like,
Well, this has been going on for a while
it
now.
sure has. Yeah. Before HDR even existed, this was a thing.
It's like we can stretch it out just a little bit. Turn on our extra color. Like, no, don't do that.
Yeah, it's just inaccurate. I don't know. I guess some people are like, well, my TV can do it, so therefore it's the
Hmm.
same as the people who are like, my speaker can play down to 30 hertz, so therefore
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to tell it to do, even though it sounds worse, even though it looks worse, right? Like it's a kind of a weird thing to even have as an option. So my advice is don't use it.
Hmm. Well, and he's got another one of these coming up in a second, but there are lots of things that your TV can do that you should leave off.
Yeah, all the edge enhancement,
Lots of things.
and TVs can
So,
go way brighter than 100 nits, showing standard dynamic range content, which you don't really want them to do. So yes, yeah, it's a way to
so,
make it inaccurate.
so sort of playing off of I guess it was him or maybe it was
Mhm.
Jonathan earlier. Um, would a professional calibration involve using one picture mode to calibrate for Rec. 709 color and a second separate picture mode to calibrate for wide color gamut? You kind of answered that before, I guess. It's kind of
Yeah,
yes, right?
well, in this thing, the strict answer is no, as in the calibrator is not going to come in and select, let's say it's the expert one or ISF one or just the living room picture mode or whatever it is. You know how TVs have multiple picture
Hmm.
modes. One of them is going to be vivid and one of them is going to be cinema or something like that. So
Sports and
yeah. So they're not going to come in and say, well, when you're watching SDR content, switch to this picture mode, switch to expert one, or switch to living room mode. And then when you're watching HDR content, switch over to cinema mode or switch over to vivid mode or something like that. It's not going to be that. It's all going to be done under one picture preset.
You
The
could do
TV
that if you wanted to, I
you
guess.
could, yeah, you could, and the difference is between day and night mode. You would have to do that if you're saying I'm going to be sometimes be watching during the day, therefore make everything the average picture level, make that all brighter, and then when I'm watching at night when it's really dark, make everything dimmer. That would require two different picture modes and two separate calibrations just for SDR. But when the TV receives an HDR signal, there is that metadata. The metadata tells the TV this is an HDR signal. It's HDR10 or it's Dolby Vision. And the TV automatically switches into a different mode. You, the user, didn't change picture modes. The TV is still in cinema mode or still in expert one mode or whatever, but it automatically changes over to now show HDR content with the wider color gamut. And then when it doesn't get that metadata, it just says, well, then this is an SDR signal with Rec. 709 color. So you, the user, you don't need two different picture modes to go between SDR and HDR, to go between Rec. 709 color and Rec. 2020 color. That's included as instructions in the signal that tells the TV to do that automatically. But you still need your calibrator to have a test pattern generator or a computer sending that metadata to the TV to get it to change into that other mode so that they can do two separate calibrations. So that's the yes and no,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
you, the user, should be able to stick with one picture mode.
So going back to things you should turn off, his new, and I'm going to say it again every time he says it because he likes to say it so much, LG 4K OLED TV has a feature called Eye Comfort Mode, which claims to reduce eye strain by automatically adjusting the color temperature. Seems like a good idea to Gary. What do we think? I think you should turn it off.
It's inaccurate. It's
Yes.
inaccurate, and this is the whole thing of during dusk, everything gets redder. iPhones have this thing now. Android's had it for a long time, right? Which is, as the day passes, it shifts the color temperature on the screen to make everything redder at dusk and make everything a little bluer at noon. And it's supposed to just, allow your eye to, based on the surrounding light around you, sort of be more comfortable or see different color temperatures. It's all inaccurate. It's all inaccurate color. So from that perspective, I wouldn't advise turning it on. Again, it's, do you want a genuinely accurate image, or are you okay with it being inaccurate in some way and just deciding for yourself that you think it looks nicer? That's really the only question here. So that's the answer. If you want it to look accurate, then don't turn it on. There's nothing stopping you from giving it a try and deciding for yourself that you think it looks nicer. That would be fine.
Yeah, but it's not accurate.
That's right.
On a different topic, sort of. Scott Wilkinson reviewed his experience of watching X-Men Apocalypse at a Dolby Cinema, and he said, hopefully home theater HDR capable projectors become more common and affordable, even though they won't be able to fill a screen as big as those found in Dolby cinemas with the same luminance levels. Gary's thinking is that obviously home theaters won't be the size of commercial Dolby cinemas, so
Mhm.
why does this matter? If we can hit the same luminance levels on smaller screens, isn't that the concern?
So this is
Yes?
all context based.
I expected it probably was.
Yeah, it's all context. But what Scott Wilkinson is trying to encourage people to do is to go out to the theater. That's where this
Yes.
comment came from. He's like, nothing we can buy at home right this second is as good in its totality as going to a Dolby Cinema right now, right? So he's saying you go out to Dolby Cinema, you have Dolby Vision with laser driven projectors. We have full Dolby Atmos sound with like 48 or 64 speakers, not just 11, right? You have this comfortable motorized reclining leather seating and stadium seating. Everybody has a great, sight line. So he's like, in its totality, there's no home theater experience right now that completely equals what you can get in a Dolby Cinema. Therefore, get out to the theater, everyone. Experience this thing. It's great. But he's saying hopefully in the future we'll have HDR capable projectors that can equal what he's seeing in Dolby Cinemas right now. We addressed this last week where it's like the projectors we have right now are like first generation. They're kind of there, but they're not 100% there. And hopefully soon they will be. So that's really all Scott's saying. And that makes sense. He's just like, don't go on the attitude that home theater is always better than the theater. He's like, there's an experience in the theaters, some theaters, a small handful of theaters right now that beats what you can get at home. So go out there and see it. That's the context.
Yeah. And sort of relatedly, between a Dolby Cinema or JVC HDR compatible home projector, which has higher contrast?
Which room is darker?
Probably a room at home, or potentially a room at home.
Potentially a room at home.
Completely black because
You don't have to have
exit signs or access way lighting or anything. So
That's right. Yeah, because honestly, the contrast you're seeing is the difference between the brightest bright and the blackest black. And the blackest black in a projector is determined by your room more than the projector in many cases anyway. In many cases, if you have any ambient light, that's brighter than the blackest black that the projector itself can throw out there. There's every chance that the JVC home projector could actually have higher contrast if you have a truly blacked out room.
mm-hmm.
But yeah,
walls.
contrast is different from peak light level.
Yes.
The Dolby Cinemas, I mean, the thing is, if you have a small enough screen, then the JVC can have a higher peak light level than the Dolby Cinema. So it very much depends. That's the answer. It depends.
Like most things.
Yeah.
Not a satisfying answer, but often the only answer. Mike has a 33 by 18 by 8 foot basement that came theater ready when he moved in with great light control, being a basement, 2 in-ceiling speakers, and a spot for a projector, both of which are pre-wired with wires running to the screen wall. Cons of the room are no soundproofing or treatment, bad in-ceiling speaker placement, an open stairwell, and 2 kids' rooms. On the pictures, there's an area that's kind of filled with toys, and he says eventually he plans to turn that into a bar, and also to black out the ceiling from the screen out to a few feet from the screen. He currently has a 5.1 Pioneer Andrew Jones system and will have, when it arrives in the mail, a Denon X2200, with the intention being to move to 5.2.2. He's found the Andrew Jones Center to be muddy sounding, and yeah, there's the toys there. So
Eventually, watching the video, folks who are watching the YouTube video, I'm throwing up some pictures here.
Eventually, that's a bar. He's found the center to be muddy sounding, and he hopes having better Odyssey in his new Denon will improve that. It may also be stuff going on in the room, being that it's a really large room, it's not really treated, so there's all kinds of things that could be going on. Because I don't think that the Andrew Jones Center is not. If he's okay with the other speakers, he should be okay with the center, shouldn't he?
Well, yeah, I mean, so this is an interesting one because it is largely due to his setup, but it is also due to the limitation of the speaker itself. The Andrew Jones Pioneer speakers, these less expensive ones, they do have some high frequency roll off. There's no question about that. That's just part and parcel with keeping the price this low. But then you put them in what's a larger than average room, which his room is, and he's sitting farther away from it than a lot of people would be sitting. And then the room appears to be fairly, it's fully carpeted, so that's certainly a help. But it's large spans of flat, hard walls, a flat, hard ceiling. So there's definitely some reflections going on here. So Austin is right to question of just changing the speaker all by itself. Is that really going to do it? And my answer is you can get some improvement.
If he does replace the speaker, what can he get for under 200? Or should he not? Should he wait and see what Odyssey does?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is you can improve upon this speaker. As a center channel speaker goes, it is your mid-tweeter, mid-design. It does, have the associated lobing issues that come with that. He's got a fairly large seating area, and he says, later on that there's kids down here all the time, so it's can be a big group that's in there. So if you're sitting off center, it's not going to sound as clear as a slightly better designed center speaker could. So there's two parts to this. I do think you can get a better center speaker, and that will help. But if you were to improve the room acoustics, that would help even more. So I'm not going to tell him don't upgrade your center speaker, because I do genuinely believe there's an improvement that can be had here from changing the speaker. That isn't always the case, but I do think it's the case here. But if you address some of the room acoustics, then it'll improve it even further.
He'd also like a new subwoofer to replace the Andrew Jones one. That I would agree with. Yes.
I 100% agree with that.
Even Andrew Jones agrees with that there were limitations of what they could do. And so for $500, what should he get?
Okay, so let's go back to that center speaker first, and I'm going to try and switch myself back to myself as an image. But yeah, so for the center speaker, and he's working within a budget here, and I know that later on he's asking about surround speakers too.
Yes.
So it seems like he's got $900 to spend, right?
It does
grand
seem like
total.
Yeah, 200, 500. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think the $500 on the subwoofer is like the minimum you're going to want to spend here anyway. So I'm good with that budget. So why don't we go ahead and say that right now? Because it's easy. It's the SVS PB1000. Within that budget, that is as good as you can do here, because it's not that I would necessarily point you to the PB1000 right away for this size of room. I would point you to a higher output subwoofer even than that. But the PB1000 cannot bottom out. It cannot be overdriven. You can turn it up as loud as it can possibly go, and then it will politely refuse to play any louder. And that's
a pretty large room, so that's a good thing to have.
Yeah, so to me, that's the easy answer here. A PB1000, which is $500 from SVS, all the way in this particular situation. So that does leave you the $400 for a center and surrounds. And so I'm going to point you to Ascend. I'm going to point you to the HTM 200 SEs. Now, they're having their B stock sale right now. So you can get a center and 2 surrounds. So you get 3 HTM 200 SEs for, under $400 total. That is easily doable. Even if you bought them brand new, it's like $25 more than $400, I think, like that. Something like that. It's not grossly over $400 if you have a little wiggle room in the budget and you want to buy A stock instead of B stock. But that can certainly be done with Ascend. The HTM 200 SEs, they are unequivocally a better sounding speaker than the Pioneer Andrew Jones Center. I will say that. They are a better sounding speaker. Now, will they sound completely perfect in this room? I think they could sound even better if you had some acoustic treatment. But they are a better sounding speaker. So I'll point you there. Now, there are alternatives. He's definitely working with some height restriction for where that center channel can fit. Now, the HTM 200 SE is no taller than his current speaker. So the current speaker fits. The HTM 200 SE should fit. That shouldn't be an issue. But I will point you over to NHT as well. They have their Super series of speakers. So they have their NHT Super Center. That fits within this price range, a very good sounding speaker. If you want something that's actually even a little bit smaller than what you have right now, this would be the one to look at. And I'll also mention EMP Tech. because EMP Tech always gets a mention when you want a nice neutral center speaker that blends in well with pretty much any other speaker because it's very neutral sounding. But that one is physically a tiny bit larger and might be just a hair too tall. It's literally like a quarter of an inch taller, but it looks like he doesn't even have that to play with.
No, because he's got a fixed frame screen, and it's probably where it's going to stay.
Also, the EMP Tech and the NHD are both glossy, and you're dealing with a projector screen, which most people don't care about. But if you're super persnickety about it, then the Ascend HDM 200 SE is a matte finish. So my vote goes to the Ascend. It is unequivocally a better speaker than what you have right now. So I think, to me, that's the way to go. But the other two are great choices too, if for whatever reason their form factor floats your boat more than the Ascend does.
Now, compared to those, though, are the remaining Andrew Jones speakers going to sound bad?
No. I mean, the towers are very capable, and he wants new surrounds anyway. So really, you're just matching them with the towers, and the towers are very good sounding. So
he wants to replace the surround speakers, which are currently the in-ceilings are being used for.
Right.
So he wants to convert the in-ceilings to be the 0.2 Atmos speakers.
Yeah, like top middles.
Are they in good position for this in the diagram? Particularly, he seems to be concerned about the left speaker.
Yeah, so I'll throw up the diagram here on the image. Now, he's got X's marked of where he thinks he might place the surround speakers. So those would be like going on the wall or hanging down from the ceiling. So he's got little filled in black circles showing the actual in-ceiling speakers as they are now. And you can almost kind of see them in the image, right at the top of the image. There they are. But looking at the diagram, I mean, where they are right now is fine. They're fine for what you'd call top middles. They're right over the seats. Granted, they're not like perfectly in line with the left and right front speakers, but then his whole front stage is like shifted over to the left a little bit. It's not like perfectly centered in the width of his room. So on it, I mean, the hassle of moving the in-ceiling speakers is totally not worth it in this case. Not at all. You know, if they were way out of position, then I might be saying something different, but where they are right now for top middles is fine.
So he also has 4 kids and a ton, he says, of neighborhood kids that like to come over and watch stuff in the theater. What thoughts do we have on seating for large groups? A bigger couch plus beanbags? Stadium seating?
Man, what do you think? Because your opinion on this is every bit as valid as anything I would say.
Well, I mean, stadium seating is kind of a big deal to build, so I don't know if that's really a valid option. You definitely have some space.
Yeah, maybe he just means something on a riser. Maybe
yes, you could put stuff on a riser. I'm sure Tom would say their kids give them beanbags; they'll be fine. How much do you really care?
Or let them sit on the floor.
Yeah, let them sit on the floor. But if you want to get a whole bunch of beanbags, I mean, how many kids is a ton of kids? Like how many? Or it's like 20 kids or what? You know, so. I guess if you want to replace the couch with a bigger couch or a second couch on a riser or a whole bunch of beanbags or whatever.
Yeah, like fine. To me,
what do they do right now when they come over?
Yeah, I mean, to me, a big sectional makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it already has a sectional, but you could get a bigger one.
Yeah.
That makes a heck of a lot of sense. Kids always love like big set because I mean they're crawling all over each other anyway. If you're talking young kids, right? So I kind of doubt that they're all sitting still and like enraptured by watching the movie. If you want to do 2 rows of seats and have the second row of seats on risers, you do have the space. I wouldn't typically advise having the sectional on the riser, right? That means a big riser.
Probably not.
Big riser. So maybe consider, having your seats be the one. But the problem with that is then you're farther away and this screen isn't that huge. Plus he wants to have a bar at the back, right?
Yeah. So you want to leave space for that.
So yeah, I mean, if you're going to have a riser and a second row of seats, yeah, I wouldn't make that the sectional, but maybe you could have a couch back there. You could also just have bar stools,
Yeah,
if
just
you want
anything, whatever,
whatever. I mean, although again, kids on bar stools, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I like the beanbags idea.
Yeah, beanbags for the front makes total sense. If you want to get
a bigger couch,
a bigger sectional, maybe do that. But unless the back row on a riser is going to be something that you're going to use or that adults are going to use, I probably wouldn't be looking for the kids seating to be on the riser. And then that means maybe you want an even bigger screen because the back row is farther away. So that to me is tricky. My vote, go
Yeah.
keep it simple.
Yeah.
Big sectional beanbag chairs. Yeah.
Beanbags. Ken has sold his Legacy Audio classic speakers and is replacing them with a pair of Wilson Audio Cub 2s and needs a sub to pair with them. He's looking at a pair of PB1000s, a pair of SB2000s, or a single SB13 Ultra. He'd like to reach as low in the frequencies as possible. And space constraints require placing the subs at the front of the room below the main speakers.
Okay. I mean, SVS is fully variable
Yes.
phase, so if you want to go through the trial and error, it's that you can brute force this. It can be done. I'm okay with that.
He spoke with SVS, and they said a pair of PB1000s is the way to go, but the rep also said that the SB2000s are more musical and tighter than the PB1000s, but the PB1000s have more power in the lower octaves. The SB2000s are the smallest, but the PB1000 is the max width he can accommodate if he's doing a pair. He'd have a little more wiggle room size-wise doing the single SB13 Ultra, and he'd rather not shake the walls, or the neighbors, but he'd still like to hear down into the 25 hertz range. What do we recommend?
All right.
Also,
well, this all
since you have the diagram up, he does point out it's not to scale. So
okay, yeah. However, it is showing us that it is open.
Yes.
That whether that's to scale or not, this is open. He has a opening to the left side. I do like your poker table. There's some very good looking poker players sitting around that poker table. You want to see that on YouTube. But it's open there, and then there's no door to the kitchen either. That's open. So you got lots of
open
for the pressure to escape. Now, look, even a pair of PB1000s in this space probably aren't going to fully pressurize it. That's probably asking too much of those subwoofers. But I completely agree with SVS's advice that the PB1000s, out of the choices that you gave, are the ones that you want here. You want sheer output capability. And when you're talking about you want to go as low as you can, and in my mind, that means 20 hertz, and I'm not worried about going lower than that. But you do want to be able to hit 20 hertz. And since you got this large open space of a room, you need to be able to hit that just coming out of the subwoofers themselves. You can't be relying on room gain to get you there, which is what you're doing with the sealed subwoofers. So I'm in agreement here. If those are the choices, the only ones that you have, honestly, like cylinder PC 2000s, which aren't tremendously more expensive than the SB 2000s. They are more expensive, though, and it seems like he's got a fairly strict budget that he wants to work within. But if you could go for a cylinder PC 2000s, if it's more about floor space, although he says the space concerns are there, and he has to put them under his main speakers, meaning boxes, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, PB 2000s, maybe they're too big or too expensive, which means PB 1000s. Like that's kind of how it's going here. So I would say PB 2000s in this room, if you can afford them and physically fit them, would not be out of place, and they would crush this space. But if they're too big or too expensive, then PB 1000s are the choice here. And don't go for a single subwoofer, go for two. We know that, right?
And you're already going to have enough trouble because of placement, so you sure don't want to have to deal with just a single sub. And so always go for two if you can. I guess almost always. Nothing is almost always, but almost always.
One man theater, you can get away with one sub. That's true. It can be done.
So also, he has written this before and actually sent that diagram before, and he used to have the surround speakers on the floor, like facing up. By the couch. So he's moved those off of the floor now, and they sound much better. So great.
Yes. Advice works.
Advice works. Don't lay your speakers on the floor. Don't do that. Pieter in
I think so.
Belgium. Remember, he still hasn't found Tom's friend in Belgium, so he'll keep looking for him. Says his home renovation is coming along nicely. Oh yeah, he's the one where it was just bare bricks and floor, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
And he should be ready for wiring to be run in about 2 months. So he wants to plan ahead. His TV, projector, and PS4 will be upstairs, but the rest of the equipment will be in the basement, and as such, he'll have many lengthy cable runs. He'll need an over 65-foot HDMI run.
Yep.
And we'll need to connect both the TV and the projector.
Mm-hmm.
He's fairly certain that's too long for any regular, even powered, HDMI cables. Should you look at HD base T, optical HDMI cables?
Yeah, and
Hmm,
this is a bit tricky.
it is.
Now it doesn't sound like he's installing Ultra HD projector or an Ultra HD television. And the reason I bring that up is because right this moment in HD base T,
Hmm.
the equipment you'd be buying is still limited to 10.2 gigabits per second. And honestly, like 10.2 gigabits per second is enough if you're running Ultra HD, even with 10-bit color, HDR metadata, if you're running it at 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. But if you're trying to run it at 60 frames per second, 10-bit color, HDR metadata, it can squeak past that 10.2 gigabits per second bandwidth limit, and you need the 18 gigabits per second,
Hmm.
full bore bandwidth limit up there. And right now, the HD base T equipment you can purchase doesn't support 18 gigabits per second. It's coming, it's in the works, and it's going to require at a minimum Cat 6E to Cat 6E cables
Hmm.
to do that. So the thing to plan ahead here would be to run twin Cat 6E cables, right? Now that you can do.
Yes.
That you can certainly have done, or you can go Cat 7 if you want to. That exceeds that, but that you can certainly do. Then the question is, are you willing to upgrade the HD base T transmitter and receiver? Because they're not cheap. That's several $100s.
Yes.
But for right now, it's certainly the solution. Now, the issue with the optical HDMI cables is that they're unidirectional. So quite a bit of equipment ends up having handshake problems, and you can't use
Oh,
audio
yeah.
return channel. The audio return channel I'm not worried about, but they end up having quite a few handshake problems sometimes because that's a bidirectional signal. It needs to have signals going both ways, and the optical HDMI cables often the powered part, the thing that's turning it into an optical signal, is only on one end of that cable. So I wouldn't advise going for the optical HDMI cables. I would advise going for HD base T in this case. I would certainly tell you run two Cat 6E cables, which shouldn't be a problem. And then yeah, that's basically what you're working with there. It is not really going to be advisable to run a single standard HDMI cable, even a powered one like a Red Mirror. You could attempt to do it with an extender in the middle of it somewhere, but that's all a little bit iffy. So, with caveats, I have to suggest going for HD base T here. Certainly, you can pre-wire for that, and just realize you might in the future, when you go to Ultra HD with HDR, you might have to replace the HD base T transmitter and receiver. But it's a few $100s versus having to open a wall entirely or something like that, which would probably be more expensive. So it seems as though Austin had to step away for a little bit here, so I'll carry on here. He's asking what type of cable should be run for his subwoofers and what termination to use. Now, you are talking about a very long run, and if this would have to be supported on both devices. It would have to be supported on the output device, being your AV receiver or your AV processor, and it would have to be supported on the subwoofer itself to use an XLR connection with a balanced cable. And given the length of this run being over 65 feet, that wouldn't be totally inadvisable. However, make your life simple. I still say run a coax cable. Just make sure it's a nice, well-shielded coax cable with RCA terminations. That will be totally fine. If it's well shielded, you will not have any problems. That's the thing to consider here. Go to Blue Jeans cable if you can. You're in Belgium, so it's not quite as easy as that. If they have Belkin wire there, but honestly, anything that is broadcast quality coax cable, whatever your electrician can provide that is good shielded coax cable, I'd go for that. Standard RCA connections for your subwoofer, that's fine. 65 feet is not that. When you get 300 feet or longer, get balanced in XLR, but 65 isn't so bad for a good shielded coax cable. Yeah, I'll let Austin carry on the next one. I only did one.
Which one? What did you do?
You're up to D now.
D. Okay. He'll be running all AV cabling in preflex conduit, and he'll be running power lines separately, but some crossover and parallel runs are going to be inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
What are some best practices for running AV cabling close to power cabling?
So the number one rule is get it as far away as you can, because even if you're only talking about a matter of inches, it's exponential loss of signal strength when it comes to electromagnetic fields, right? So every inch that you can get it away is beneficial in terms of the inductance being lowered, and that's what's happening here. It's inductance between the electrical power signal going through an AV cable that's running parallel to it. So the farther away you can get it, the better, even if we're only talking inches. Where they have to cross, attempt to have them cross at 90-degree angles. That's always what you want to do. The less you can have them parallel to one another, the better. So the more severe the angle, and a full right angle is best of all, because that is the least parallel it can possibly be.
Yes.
So that's what you want to do. Now, having it inside of the conduit, that doesn't really make any difference, because you're not running a shielded conduit, and you wouldn't particularly want to run metal conduit anyway. So that doesn't really play into it. But really, it's just a matter of get them as far away from parallel as possible, which means 90-degree angles if possible, or just not parallel if you can't do that. Don't have any coils in the AV cable.
Yes, for sure. Don't do that.
And sometimes electricians do that, right? They run extra length and then they coil it up. Don't do that. Don't run any coils. And literally, even if you're only talking inches, as far away as is possible. But that's about all you can do, really. And keep in mind that you're dealing with three-dimensional space, right? Far away doesn't always just mean left to right. It can mean up and down, too, because I imagine you have some floor joists involved. You can run one higher than the other. That counts as distance, too.
Assuming it's physically possible, is it okay to run several speaker wires all within the same conduit? Yes.
Yes. Yes, it is. I assume he's worrying about the same thing here.
Yeah, interference.
Speaker cable is going to be like power cables. So speaker wires are carrying certainly a higher power signal than like your low voltage wiring or your low level RCA cables or something like that. But yeah, speaker wire next to other speaker wire, you're not so worried about inductance there. Again, the power levels are considerably lower than what's going through your mains, what's going through your actual electrical outlets. It's way lower power than that. So yeah, it's fine to run multiple speaker wires. Don't, this is a physical concern. Don't cram them in there so that they're going to, eventually rub against each other or something like that. But yeah,
and don't braid them or anything.
Right. Yeah. Signal wise, it's fine.
Yeah. Well, remember, you can't avoid having some proximity between your speaker wires where they come to the binding posts on your receiver. Sure. So you always have some proximity.
And 14.2 speaker, or 14.4 rather, 14.4 speaker wire is your friend here. You're talking about long lengths, so a thicker gauge is beneficial. So 14.4 is really nice. It's a little bit easier to work with, and then you're just joining two together. So instead of having 4 leads, you'll take, 2 pairs of those leads, twist them together. That effectively gives you an 11 gauge cable, but it's a lot easier than working with 11 gauge cable. So,
yes, which is
14.4.
Not any fun.
Yeah.
Michael. Is this the only Michael we've had so far today? Yeah.
It might be today.
We do have several, but I'm trying to if I needed to distinct which one it was. So Michael is in need of an HTPC. A few weeks ago, he retired his old 2007 iMac. Old iMac is old. And is in need of a new PC. His wife suggested they get something that could also connect via HDMI to the home theater system.
Yeah.
Michael likes Apple, but doesn't want to spend the money for a new Mac, and his wife is a Windows user anyway, so he's thinking something slim with lots of RAM, a good video card, HDMI output, and a Blu-ray drive for backing up movies to his NAS. What do we recommend?
So I want to address the computer side of things first, because as far as video goes, you don't need a great video card. The integrated graphics on any Intel Core series processor are completely adequate for playing back video. So I don't know if his
playback is easy as long as you're not editing video or anything.
I don't know if his wife is doing something more graphic intensive. No, Michael is the Michael we know who's visually impaired. So
yes, I
seriously doubt that like the highest end graphics are a concern for him. That would seem strange to me. So even if you're gaming on it, you probably don't need like ultra settings, right? Like maximum settings, right? So I just question whether you actually need a good video card or whether you just think you do because you always have in the past, right? That was like what we did. But honestly, these days, integrated graphics on the Core series of Intel processors is like completely adequate for what almost anybody wants to do.
Yeah.
And
Well,
same
and I
with
doubt that he's really gaming anyway. If what he had was an '07 iMac, I doubt he was doing much gaming
yeah,
as it was, so that's probably
same
not a
with
concern.
the lots of RAM request. Like you don't
Yes.
need lots of like four
I mean, if you
gigabytes of
want
RAM.
lots of RAM, you can get lots of RAM. RAM doesn't cost much
Yeah,
anymore, but you
yeah.
probably really don't need it.
It seems unlikely, right?
It does.
So I just want to address those, and then the whole thing about a Blu-ray drive is, well, I'll get into that in a little bit. So yeah, I'll just question that first, whether you really need a separate video card and lots of RAM. I don't know what defines lots of RAM. Different people have different definitions, but
I
certainly
would
you don't
define it as over 8,
over 8. Yeah, I
but
really
I
don't think
don't
you need
know.
it.
No,
Really don't. So yeah, I think what he's hoping is I can point him to like a specific model and just say buy this
buy this.
from
Yes,
wherever. And unfortunately, first of all, finding one that has a Blu-ray drive built in is like impossible.
basically
For whatever reason.
impossible. Yeah, I
Um,
can't think of any.
yeah, and then one of your main concerns is you want this thing to be quiet, right? So
Yes.
I could
I
point you
assume.
to
I don't know. Maybe it's not in the theater. It's just connected to the theater.
right, right. Well, if it's going to be HDMI, it can't be
Too far.
away.
Yeah.
So I assume you want it quiet. So most of us who are building HTPCs are sort of building our own, right? We're buying
Yes.
individual parts, putting it together ourselves. Now, if you don't want to do that, then go to a computer store. I don't know if he has NCI. I know he's in Canada, but I don't know if he has NCIX where he lives. That might be more of a West Coast thing. But you will certainly have a computer store somewhere in your area. They love to put together computers for customers.
Yes.
That's their bread and butter. And I would kind of advise doing that. Now, there are lots of places where you can go to get guides on what parts to put in, or, you know, at least give you a ballpark idea of what sort of level of parts. And I actually like, there's a guide, there's tons of guides. Most of them are fine, but I like one that's Tech Buyer's Guru, simply because they're basically choosing the parts that I would probably choose as well. And they're not like super overpowered or super expensive. They're like reasonable parts to put together to get a nice home theater PC. They give you options for a video card if you want to game on it as well. So that option is there. I'm not saying you can't do it. If you have a reason to do it, you might not actually need it. But I like that guide. So I'll have that link, avrant.com, come there. And what you can do is just take that parts list, go to your local computer store and say, you know, negotiate a little bit, talk a little bit and say, you know, maybe they don't have these exact parts, but something that's, you know, in that ballpark, and have them put it together, because it's better than any model that's already out there from HP or Asus or something like that I could point you to. None of them really have all the features that you're looking for. So that's the way I would come at this. The alternative is to get like an Intel NUC, right?
Yes.
Because an Intel NUC is going to be small and silent. You'll have to have your optical drive, your Blu-ray drive will have to be external,
Which you can do.
Which is fine. You get a USB Blu-ray drive. There's no real problem with doing that.
Which might be better anyway, because once you back up everything you have, you're not going to use it that commonly.
Yeah.
So,
So, you know, if what you want is small and slim and powerful enough, it's not going to have a separate video card in an Intel NUC. There's no space in there for a separate video card. But I really don't think you need it.
Probably not.
So that's the small silent I would love to have as an HTPC solution. You just need a USB Blu-ray drive. Otherwise, go with the guide, take it to your local computer store. It's better than anything I point you to at, like, you know, Best Buy or London Drugs or even Amazon for that matter. So that's my answer there. I don't know if you have any different thought on that one.
Not really. I mean, I almost always recommend either building your own or having somebody build something for you than buying something that already exists. But yeah, something pre-made. Unless you're going to go, I mean, and I guess it's basically having somebody make something for you. There are a number of companies now that's what they do, is they build custom computers for people. But usually they tend to be higher end.
They're more focusing on the gamer crowd and
so
Canada.
Canada, yes.
Thing now.
I'm sure some of them probably operate in Canada, but
I'm sure.
But yeah, I mostly just agree with all that.
Okay.
Ted is back again. And now I thought we dealt with this. He's still trying to make his speaker purchase decision. I thought you decided last week. From store demos, he has favored the Revell Performa 3 series, but has not been able to demo the Ascend Sierra RAL speakers in person yet. I thought he did.
No, that was Bill.
That was Bill. Okay,
Bill and the Focals, not Ted and the Rebels.
Yes, and he does have Sierras already. Can we offer any opinion on comparing those two against one another? Well,
Well,
I
it's
have not
another.
heard either, so I have no first-hand experience. But
Yeah, and it's another
uh,
opinion one. And
yeah,
I'll go ahead and say it. I think the Ascend Sierra RAL speakers are better than the Revel Performa 3 series. I actually think the Revel Performa 3 series are a pretty good example of sounding similar to the Ascend SE series.
hmm.
I think they're sort of a lateral move from one another. So I mentioned this when it was Bill asking about the Focal Electra BE series. I was like, I think they're kind of a lateral move. He heard both and he's like, I actually prefer the Sierras. He's, that was his opinion that
Yeah,
he preferred the Sierra Rels, thought they actually sounded a little better than the Electra BE series. And then you factor in the price and it's like, well, that's an easy decision.
yeah.
So I'm sort of in a similar boat. I think the Revel Ultima series is closer in out and out performance to the Sierra Ral. And again, there's a huge price delta there. So I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and say I think the Sierra RAL speakers are better performing speakers than the Performa 3. I would opt for them over the Performa 3. Not that I think the Performa 3 are bad sounding at all, because I certainly don't think the Ascend SE series speakers are bad sounding speakers. Far from it. So these are all good choices, but I do think the Sierra RALs are the better ones here. That's my opinion. I don't know.
But if you can find a way to demo them, do it.
Yes, absolutely.
What's the price difference between those two?
So it's $2,700 for the Sierra RAL towers.
Mm-hmm.
Now the Performa 3 series, I think their tower. Oh, I don't want to misquote there.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't look up the prices on that.
Yeah.
The Ultima 2 series, I know are
Yeah.
thousands of dollars more expensive, like $8,000 to $10,000 for their smallest towers that they offer. So, they're much more expensive in the Ultima 2 series for sure.
If he were to go with the Sierra RAL speakers,
Sure.
he finds himself leaning towards wanting 3 identical speakers across the front. Mm-hmm. However, going with Sierra 2 left and right speakers and just a Horizon center would save quite a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so, well, either one is fine. I would say either one is probably fine.
So yeah, I mean the factor here is room size, seating distance.
Yes.
Right.
As a reminder, his room is only 13 feet wide and 12 feet long, but he's concerned about realism and mid-bass slam. Well, you don't have to worry about that too much from the center, I don't think.
Yeah, so this is the big concern. He even spoke with David Fabricant directly at Ascend, and Dave is a very forthright guy. He's like, look, the Horizon speaker, it's larger, it has a dedicated mid-range driver and 2 bass woofers, it's front ported. In terms of what it can do, it can produce more mid-bass than the Sierra 2 can. It can play louder than the Sierra 2 can. It has a larger version of the RAL ribbon tweeter, so everything about it, it's bigger. It can play louder. That is a fact, and I do not disagree whatsoever with that factual statement. But do you need it in a 12 by 13 foot room sitting like 9 feet away? And the answer is absolutely not. You really, really don't. The Sierra 2s are very capable bookshelf speakers. They can absorb 150 watts all day long continuously, which with their 87 dB efficiency at 1 watt and sitting 9 feet away means they could play at 105 decibels all day long, which is louder and longer than you would be able to tolerate as a human being. So there's no concern about, I mean, if you're talking, this whole idea of mid-bass slam, like I want to feel thumps in my chest when a bass, an upright double bass is being plucked, I want to get that tactile sensation. You have the sheer output to do it. This is more about your subwoofers and your speakers all being well integrated with each other and the room. Because I want to talk a little bit about this mid-bass slam thing that comes up. The reason it's a problem in so many people's setups is because they don't have a great integration between their subwoofer and speakers. That mid-bass falls right in that region where they're crossing over with each other.
Yeah.
That whole range from 40 to 160 hertz, that's exactly where they're crossing over. So if you don't have good subwoofer integration with your speakers, you're going to have mid-bass problems. If you have them poorly positioned in your room, you're going to have mid-bass problems. And that's where it comes from, not from bookshelf speakers not being able to play loud enough. It can actually be a problem when they play too loud and they happen to be sitting in a room mode. That's a big problem.
Yes.
So yeah, you don't, look, I get it. I get the he wants to buy these speakers and keep them forever. He doesn't want to buy speakers after this.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll move to a larger room in the future. That's a legitimate reason. That's why I bought mine. I don't need them in I have a tiny little apartment room right now. I sure as heck didn't need 3 Horizons up front. I got them because I hope and intend to one day have a much larger room. And I intended to buy these speakers once and never buy speakers again. So on that side, Ted, absolutely. If these might be moving to a future room, for sure, go for 3 Horizons. I did. It's not like they're going to sound bad in your room. Mine don't. They sound fantastic. Nope. But if they're going to stay in this room, you don't. I would get 3 Sierra 2s. I wouldn't even get the Horizon Center. I'd get 3 Sierra 2s. Save yourself the money. They are more than adequate for your room size and seating distance. And mid-bass slam is about integrating them well with your subwoofer in your room, not what they can just output on their own, because they can play 105 dB all day long. That is plenty of slam.
He also wants to keep as much floor space and distance between the listening positions and the speakers as possible. So is the front ported design of the Horizon something that should be considered?
I mean, yeah, the Sierra 2s are rear ported, but
you don't need that much space.
3 inches. 3 inches all you need. And the binding posts stick out of the back of all of the Ascend speakers anyway. Now, that's not 3 inches, but it's like 1.5 inches. So yeah, honestly, like 3 inches is really all you need for the Sierra 2s to have adequate, quote unquote, breathing room. With a little bit of bass management, you won't have to worry about having slightly emphasized bass from the boundary gain effect. So this isn't a problem. You can have them very close to that wall. The Horizon speakers are a larger speaker anyway, so it negates the distance you would gain by having them as close to the wall as possible and then having the Sierra 2s only 3 inches away. So from that point of view in this situation, you're not gaining any placement flexibility from the front port. That's my answer there.
So after he decides which front speakers to get, he'll eventually be upgrading his subwoofer and surround speakers. Which should he focus on first?
Subwoofers.
Yes.
Honestly,
you really had to ask. Yes.
It's as simple as that. They will make way more audible difference than whatever you're using as surrounds. Not that upgrading your surrounds eventually is something to avoid or anything like that, but big difference with new subwoofers, minimal difference with new surrounds. So.
I know we've already addressed this, and really, do you have to ask at this point, Ted? When upgrading a subwoofer, is it better to get 1 really nice one or 2 not as nice ones?
Right. So, I mean, if you're talking about 2 crappy ones versus 1 half decent one, okay, get the 1 half decent, but that's not even in the realm of what he's looking at. And again, 12 by 13 room. 12 by 13
not
room.
A large room.
No. You could go with a pair of SB 1000s from SVS, more than adequate for this room. Yes. So, get 2. There's no reason. You do not need ultras. You do not need pluses. You do not need 15-inch ULS 15s from HSU. It's get 2. SB 1000s would be fine. He'll probably get SB 2000s. Those are more than you need. They will sound great.
They will. For the surrounds, where after he eventually upgrades his subwoofers and gets to the surrounds, should he get monopoles, dipoles, bipoles? He has monopoles right now, and they definitely sound directional and more obvious the closer he sits to them. And he's thinking he'd prefer something that sounds a little more even across maybe not all 8 seats, but at least the 4 main seats.
Sure.
Would something with a more diffuse design be better?
So this is tough, and I've changed my tune on this over the years. I vote for monopoles.
It's a very small room, but yes.
Yeah.
Monopoles.
I just
up higher a little bit.
A little bit up higher. Yeah. The main reason is object-based audio. Object-based audio is designed to work with directional monopole speakers, and that's the way the winds are blowing. Not only that, you're probably going to end up with some Ascend Sierra RAL speakers, either Sierra 2s or Horizon RAL fronts.
Yes.
I don't know
dispersion even. So
well, there's that, but I don't know of anything
comparable that's bipolar dipole.
I mean, maybe the Electra BE bipoles would be about as close as you could get. Man, are they expensive? And I wouldn't call them worth it. I really wouldn't. So, yeah, Ascend's going to have their Sierra Sats coming out in the future. They will be a little bit less expensive than the Sierra 2s. They will be wall mountable. They'll have the exact same ribbon tweeter as the Sierra 2s.
And he has time to wait because these are for the
future.
He has
time to wait. So. They're not going to be cheap, but that's going to be your timbre match there. And yeah, just get them up, elevate them a little bit, 2 feet above your head or something like that. That'll help with the whole, localizability thing. And then, I mean, granted, when you're in the rightmost seat sitting next to the right surround speaker, it's going to be more noticeable. But then again, even a bipole speaker will have that same thing happening to it.
Yeah, really, if you're really close to it.
Yeah, really only a dipole would get you away from that by sitting right in the null. And then it's never going to timbre match, and it's not going to do object audio right. So that's the trade-off.
He's also thinking of expanding to Atmos at some point. If he goes with the RAL tweeters in his speakers now, will the Atmos speakers need to have RAL ribbons also?
There we go. That was just a question. I mean, factually, no. You don't need it. You don't need it. If you want the absolute closest timbre match you can get, then yeah.
I mean, they're already on the ceiling, so there's going to be a little bit of timbre just from position relative to your head. But
but I mean, Atmos speakers, I'd vote for no. And that's me.
Yeah.
That's me.
Yeah, it's you.
Crazy caring about timbre matching. I don't.
What are you going to do when you move to Atmos?
Well, I've already got 11 speakers, so I already have Sierra 2s everywhere.
So you're just going to mount your Sierras on the ceiling?
They're just going to be up there on the ceiling. Yep. That's where they're going to go. I'm not going to replace them because they have them. But yeah, no, I don't think it's necessary for the Atmos speakers. I would actually kind of vote for like the ones we've been talking about, like those Focal Birds or something like that. Maybe even more than Ascend's own HTM 200s. The HTM 200s are great, but those Focal Birds are even easier to mount on a ceiling.
Yes.
And nice and compact, so yeah.
What about the Sierra Sats when they come out?
Yeah, I mean, that would be the
ceiling?
Yeah. I mean, they're easily wall mountable, so they'll be ceiling mountable too. But certainly more expensive.
What they're going to cost yet?
Over 1,100.
Over 1,100
for a pair. That's a lot of money for
that's a lot. Yeah, I mean, it depends on whether are you going 0.4 or just 0.2 or what are you doing?
That's a lot. I'd say they're worth it as surrounds. I'd say they're worth it as your surrounds.
Surrounds, yes.
But for the ceiling speakers, that's a lot of money for ceiling speakers.
Jason.
Oh, do you have time, Austin?
Oh yeah, let's go ahead. We've only got what, 2 more? Yeah.
Oh geez.
If you have time, I have time.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's just go ahead and finish.
Tom's not here to say no.
No. I don't want to leave these to next week.
All right.
Be behind. So Jason has an Oppo BDP 93, a little older, and a Denon AVR 4810 Ci receiver.
Yeah.
He's using HDMI 2 to send audio to the Denon and using HDMI 1 directly to his TV, since the Denon won't pass a 3D video signal. Somehow he's getting a ground loop when he disconnects the HDMI 2 connection. Oh no, somehow he's getting a ground loop. And when he disconnects the HDMI 2 connection on the Oppo, it goes away. The Oppo is connected to the TV, the TV is connected to the Denon, so why would making an additional connection create a ground loop?
It's a very good question.
He has an external amplifier and a subwoofer in the electrical chain, and he could attempt to ground them all together, but the issue seems to be only with the HDMI port on the Oppo.
Yeah.
Does he have a bad HDMI board?
Is this actually a ground loop?
Yes.
Or a different kind of hum?
Is it just a hum? Yeah.
Right now, it definitely can be a hum. Like I went through this experience of I was just trying. This was actually over at Paul McDonald's place. Paul, our race car driver, who has his logo on his race car. We were just trying to get radio, like just regular FM radio, working, and we were getting horrible reception and this hum coming through the radio. I disconnected the HDMI cable and it went away.
That's
yeah. So
HDMI, man.
Yeah, I know, right? And so that wasn't a ground loop. That wasn't a ground loop. That was not radio and an HDMI cord, and the HDMI cord somehow was acting as an antenna, basically, when it was tuned into the tuner. And in that case, Now, he's already said he's tried different HDMI cables. In that case, changing the HDMI cable worked. For whatever reason, that particular HDMI cable, I don't know what the heck was going on.
Bad shielding or something
Or,
happening.
I mean, there are 19 little pins in there, each
Yeah.
with their own little wires. Sometimes they leave some of them disconnected
Yes,
in certain HDMI cables. So
But that's not the case here.
well, we don't know for certain, right?
Well, if he tried different cable, I guess if he has maybe the same cables, if he bought a bunch of cables of the same kind at once and they're all the same.
I hate saying that because telling you to swap HDMI cables is like it's the my least favorite advice, but I have to say it because there's a possibility. There's a possibility it actually is the cable in this case. Can we do any troubleshooting here, such as what would you even do? I mean, if you disconnect HDMI 1 going directly from the Oppo to the TV, and you instead use HDMI 2 from the Oppo into the AV receiver, and then from the AV receiver to the TV, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that get rid of the ground loop, or what we're thinking is a ground loop, or some other hum? Does that do it? Because then it's an indication. What does that even tell us?
It tells you that maybe it's one of the ports.
Yeah, or could you try both HDMIs out from the Oppo, both going into two different HDMI inputs on the Denon, and then from the Denon to the TV, right? Like, we have to narrow down, is this a problem with the Oppo itself? Because he's had other HDMI 2 output audio issues in the past.
Oh, yeah, he has, yeah.
Which makes me wonder, like, maybe it is just something on the HDMI board of this Oppo, or maybe it's one of the cables. Right.
It's an older player, so it's possible something could have happened. I mean, it should. I mean, not that they go like they age poorly or anything, but something could have happened to it over this time.
Because if this were actually a ground loop, and a ground loop happens when you have a different in electrical potential between something that actually has the ground plug, either two things that both have actual, round little ground plugs, or what a lot of people don't fully know is that the slender side, the right hand side on a traditional plug, that's going to ground too. It's going to service ground. The one with the round ground plug should actually be going to something that is physically going to the ground outside your house. And that's how you can sometimes end up with a voltage potential difference between service ground and physical ground.
And it's very distinctive when you hear it. So,
it's 60 hertz. It's only 60 hertz.
It's only 60 hertz. So
it's just a 60 hertz tone coming through whatever. So that's why I
don't
wonder
know if it's that or if it's just a hum of some kind.
Just a hum. Yeah, because there can be other hums other than ground loops.
I wonder what else. Do you think it's going to the... Is it only when it's connected to the TV? Or when it's not connected to the TV?
I mean, he's saying, he's always got the Oppo directly connected to the TV. He plugs HDMI 2. It's
only when he connects it to the... So... And there shouldn't be anything else connected, because if he had some kind of analog cable, like an RCA cable or something on one side or the other, and it was wired weird inside the component, that could be causing some kind of thing. But that shouldn't be being passed through HDMI like all the way through like that.
Well, I really don't think it's a signal being carried through the HDMI. It's picking
it probably
up
is
some
just interference.
Yeah.
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 See if you can borrow an HDMI cable from somebody else. Kind.
Because
unless all of yours are different. If they're already different, then that's not what it is.
But
you're gonna have to do some testing and get back.
Yeah, do the troubleshooting of disconnecting the direct connection from the Oppo to the TV and then feeding it all through the AV receiver, either just HDMI 2 or both HDMI 1 and HDMI 2 going into the receiver and then from the receiver to the TV. Because if that eliminates it, then it's got to be something in the Oppo, right?
Yeah.
Because we know the TV to the receiver doesn't hum on its own, and we know the Oppo to the TV on its own doesn't hum. It's only when you create this circular thing going around.
I wonder if it's volume dependent.
That too.
Like if it gets louder, if you turn the volume up, that could change what it is too. I don't really know. It's another hum. We're stumped by a hum again.
I hate hums. I hate them. Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that HDMI 2 cable in close proximity or going over top of any of your other equipment? Because if it is, then it's probably acting as an antenna. That's probably what's going on there. So yeah, unfortunately, my best
make sure it's not laying on top of anything else.
Yeah. Or just in very close proximity.
Yeah, close proximity. Yeah.
I wish I
Get
had.
back to us.
I wish I had better. Maybe Tom will have an idea. I'm sure
Maybe,
we'll
yeah.
revisit this either
Oh, I'm
next
sure
week or
we
the
will.
week
It's a
after,
hum. We
so,
can't get away
yeah.
from it. And let's see. Is this lastly?
This should
Yes,
be the last
lastly.
one. And we're going over time. Tom's gonna be
Michael. Let's see. We're only 12 minutes over right now. Whatever. Michael is considering an AV receiver upgrade in the near future. He does have plans to eventually upgrade to 4K and HDR, but he also plans on sticking with a 2.2 speaker setup, maybe expanding to a 4.2 with a Phantom Center. And that's the most speakers he would ever consider.
Okay.
So he doesn't need Atmos. And he doesn't need more than 5.1. But he's observed that in order to get the best room correction programs, he's stuck with a higher price tag and features he'll never use.
And that
It's
always
hard
the
to
way.
even get 5.1 anymore. Basically, everything comes with 7.1.
Yeah, just 5.1. That.
He's not super impressed with the YPOW on his current receiver. And it's old enough that it doesn't have any subwoofer EQ. So he's very drawn to something with Odyssey Multi-Q X32 with sub-EQ HT.
Sure.
What's the least expensive receiver that has that level of Odyssey and 4K and HDR support? And is there such a thing as a 5.1 model with that Odyssey, or even just regular Multi-Q XT?
No, on the second part with 5.1, no. 5.1. Let's see. One of the Marantz Slimline models is 5.1 with regular Mult EQ, but not Multi Q XT, just regular Mult EQ.
Yes,
there is that, but no on that second part. So as for what's the least expensive with Multi Q XT32 with sub EQ HT, that also will be able to handle 4K and HDR. It's the ones we mentioned earlier. It's the Denon X4200 or the Marantz SR6010, which is they're $900 on accessories for less. I completely don't blame you for wanting to be able to pay less, but as soon as you go down to the X3200 or the Marantz SR5010, both of those are 7.2 models, then it's Multi-Q XT, not XT32 with sub-EQ HT. So
if you didn't need the 4K, you could go something older and then you could do it. But if you want 4K, then you can't.
And I mean, they're fantastic receivers, so it's not like you're missing out on that. Now, before we go on,
you're only going to be not using, well, I guess 3 channels if it's 7.1, but So.
Before we go on, I was thinking, maybe he could get one of the mini DSP Dirac boxes because he only needs 2 channels, right?
Yes,
only needs 2 channels, so you don't have to get the big $1,000 8-channel one that can do 7.1. He could get one of they're $900.
So you might as well get the receiver.
So you might as well get the full-blown AV receiver, because I don't think his current receiver even has. It might have pre-outs, I don't know, but you would have to have pre-outs to use the Dirac box. So it might, depending on what you have already, necessitate a new AV receiver.
And then you still need an amp.
And then you need an amp, and then it's $900 for the 2-channel Dirac box. So that financially doesn't make more sense than getting the $900 SR6010 or X4200W. So looks like you're spending $900. Sorry.
Although he wonders, how crucial is subwoofer equalization anyway?
Way more than any other equalization.
Yes.
Way more. I would.
Most of your trouble is.
I would happily give up all of the higher frequencies to get subwoofer equalization.
And that's why people buy mini DSPs and only run their subs through them. So.
So that is the critical part. If you're going to have equalization, you want it on the subwoofers. That's where you want it first, more than anywhere else. So.
And similarly, how much better is XT32 than regular Multi-Q XT?
It is a matter of degrees. XT32 is simply it has more points, more data points. It takes finer grid, more granular in its measurements and in where it applies all those EQ bands. So honestly, Multi-EQ XT does a pretty half-decent job. However, the greater granularity, particularly in the bass, is helpful because you can get that much more linear by having that granularity, right? So honestly, Multi-EQ XT sounds darn good in as far as if you have some issues and if you've addressed the biggest problem. The biggest problem is getting uniform base first, because equalization can't help you if your base is non-uniform, right?
Yes. And he
So
is talking about 2 subs at least.
Yes, he is talking about 2 subs. So if you can get the uniformity, then equalization can really help you out. And then, of course, the more granular it is, the better job it can do. But XT does a pretty good job. So that does change the conundrum here, right?
Yes. You don't have to have XT32.
If you don't have to have XT32, then you can go down to, let's see, what has XT. I think all of the Denon X series models at a minimum.
So you could do what,
like
the
even the 1200, I think. Even the 1200. So that's a consideration.
Did they do HDR?
Yep. Yep. They all have 18 gigabit per second HDR. So that might be your solution there. Now, of course, they don't do dual independent subwoofers without sub EQHT, but if you're setting them up
properly,
which he has, he's more or less placed them in the middle of the front, and he did our advice of his whole room, not just his theater area, because his theater area only takes up a portion of the full open space, but he put it more or less in the middle of the front of the whole open space and the middle of the back of the whole open space. So you shouldn't particularly need sub EQHT, and then multi QXT does do a pretty darn good job, certainly better than your YPow with no sub EQ at all.
Yes.
So that is a real option. I'm not being facetious at all. That's a real option. Look at any of the X series models from Denon, and you don't have to go all the way up to the X4200. So, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yes. He was recently. No, it's not. He's got one more part. He has one more part. Yes. He was recently at a music festival, and he really noticed the chest-thumping tactile bass of kick drums and such.
Mm-hmm.
He has a pair of HSU VTF2 subs, and the bass in his room sounds strong, clean, and extended, but he can't quite recreate the same physical sensation.
Mm-hmm.
Does his room with the kitchen and dining area and an open stairway going upstairs ever preclude him from feeling the bass in the same way? Or could even larger subwoofers deliver the chest thumps and pant flaps?
Well, it makes it way more challenging.
It does.
If you even just take the step of installing a door at the top of the stairway,
yes,
that would go a huge way, because
basically you're trying to pressurize your entire house.
Yeah.
So.
And this is a question of pressurization. We are talking about the physical sensation of feeling the air move against your chest and giving you that physical thump in the chest. Yes. And that is about pressurization. Now, of course, SPL means sound pressure level. You could just get a subwoofer capable of playing loud enough to pressurize your whole house. You could do it. It can be done. So, the answer is no. It doesn't completely preclude you from ever having it. And yes, crazy high output subwoofers could get you there. But then you're pressurizing your whole house.
Yes. So do you really want to do that?
Are you ever listening downstairs while someone else is upstairs? Because they might not appreciate it.
Yes.
Those are the answers to your questions directly.
Yes.
It could be done. You could get yourself a pair of Seaton submersives or some JTR captivators, and you can do this. It can be done. But you are looking at pressurizing your whole darn house because you don't have a door at the top of your stairway.
If you can't reduce the size of the area, then
that's right.
Potentially larger steps.
Well, that's it. Holy cow! It's like a 2.5 hour podcast. Good gracious! But we've come to the end of it. Austin, thank you so
It's not the longest ever, but yes, I'm glad that I was able to be here so that there could still be a show this week, even though
that's right. Yeah,
it's at an odd time. But
Tom did want to be here, but without power at his place, that is a challenge for recording a podcast and broadcasting it online. Tough to do. His batteries wouldn't have lasted this long.
No.
So I want to say, thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you to Austin for being here. Thank you to Tom. We'll look forward to having you back next week. And so we hope folks have enjoyed this podcast. Obviously, we've been answering questions. We are AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And to get your questions answered, you have to contact us. Easiest way, email. That is question@avrant.com. please CC Rob at avrant.com and Tom at avrant.com as well. We love to receive all the questions all at once together so we can view them, prepare ourselves for the coming week. You can also contact us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/avrantpodcast. And you can come to the website. That's avrant.com. You can leave a comment there. You can also donate at avrant.com to help support the podcast, just like Fred, Mike, and Jason did this week. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
And we'll also thank our other listeners of the week, Mwani, Adriano, and Michael I, all for supporting the podcast in other ways by letting retailers and manufacturers know that they heard about their products on AV Rant. We always appreciate that. And you can also follow us on Twitter. I am at First Reflect. Tom is at avrant_Tom. And our producer, Austin, is at Austin Pond. Austin also has his own podcast, We Watch Movies. What's that about again?
Let's see. It's about various shades of mahogany wood for furniture building.
Only mahogany.
Only mahogany.
Only
I mean, you
mahogany.
wouldn't use less than mahogany, would you?
Who would?
I mean,
well,
how else
even
is
if
your
you,
apartment going to smell of rich mahogany?
If you did, who would podcast about it? That's the real
yeah.
question. But yes, that's why it's called We Watch Movies.
Yes,
You never figure out what they do over there without
Nope.
the description stuff. That's what it is. Thanks so much, everyone. It's been a blast. I don't know if I'm leaving anything out, but it's 2.5 hours in, so
Yes,
you get what you get.
you do.
All right, folks. For AV Rant, I am Rob H.
And I'm Austin Pond. Now go out and listen to something.